Fellow rational thinkers, I am your strategic observer, Maggie Liu. Today we are going to break down a narrative system that is an extraordinarily precise exercise in preemptive risk avoidance and asset restructuring. Let us take a look together. When I opened my eyes, the watch drum outside the window had just sounded 5 times. Moon shadow gauze faded almost white from washing, hung from the bed canopy. A water-red cloak rested at the foot of the bed. Its collar was trimmed in snowy rabbit fur. Saying that the residence was holding a spring banquet today and the wind beside the lake would be strong, she told me to dress presentably and not disgrace the general's residence. I stared at the cloak for a long time, my fingertips slowly digging into my palms. In my previous life, it had been this same day and this same cloak. That afternoon, Shen Mingju set a trap beside Kushui Lake. She planned to fall into the water before a garden full of guests, after having the Marquis of Yong'an, Gu Jingming, lured to the lakeside in advance, so he could rescue her. She calculated the timing and bribed the old maid responsible for showing the way. What she did not calculate was that Gu Jingming would enter the garden early through the western moon gate. By the time she reached the water's edge, there was no time to change her position. While she hesitated, her maid collided with me. I was the one who fell into the water. Gu Jingming carried my drenched body ashore, in clear view of more than a dozen people. My lawful mother, Madame Qin, burst into tears on the spot and said a young woman's chastity mattered more than her life. My father, Shen Rong, feared the news would damage the general's residence. So the next day he exchanged birth charts with the Marquis of Yong'an's household and betrothed me to Gu Jingming. Shen Mingju accepted the gold betrothal card sent by the Duke of Dingguo's household and married the sickly Xiao Heng, who was said to be near death. Later, Gu Jingming rose from an idle marquis holding a nominal post in the capital garrison to a powerful vice minister of revenue, in charge of grain transport. Everyone said I was fortunate. One fall into the water had fished up a lifetime of glory. Only I knew that to cover the grain deficit in the capital granaries left by the Marquis of Yong'an's household, I sold the first shipment of spices my mother had left me and produced 8,000 taels in cash. To help Gu Jingming avoid a military grain trap set by Chancellor Qin, I spent 3 days and 3 nights combing through 17 old ledgers and found the discrepancy between empty warehouses and transport documents. Every promotion he received afterward rested upon my silver, my connections, and my calculations. Once his wings had grown strong. However, he despised the fact that my birth mother had come from a merchant family. He called me vulgar and money-minded and said I was unworthy to sit at his table. He seized the shop deeds, locked me inside the prayer hall of the western courtyard, and brought Chancellor Qin's niece into the household. That night, the western courtyard caught fire. The door had been locked from outside. I broke 2 door bars, but not a single person came. Beyond the flames towering into the sky, music and drums continued in the front courtyard. Only then did I learn that the household was holding a celebration for Gu Jingming's promotion to Vice Minister of Revenue. Shen Mingju's end was not much better than mine. 3 years after their marriage, Xiao Heng died of illness. She fought his elders for control of the Duke's household and threw the inner residence into chaos. In the end, the clan sent her back to her maiden family, and she survived by selling her jewelry. At the final moment before my death, I had thought that if I could begin again, I would rather drown in Kushui Lake than let Gu Jingming touch me once more. Now heaven had truly sent me back. Young Miss, my personal maid, Qingdai, lifted the curtain and entered. Seeing me sitting ramrod straight, she started. "It is not yet dawn. Why are you awake? Eldest Miss just sent someone to urge you again. The spring banquet begins at noon, and she asks that you go over early to help receive the female guests." I threw back the covers, climbed out of bed, and tossed the water-red cloak into the bottom of a chest. Fetch a bucket of well water and open the western window. Qingdai stared. "Young miss, it is only the 2nd month. Do as I say." The instant the well water poured over me, the cold stabbed between my bones like countless fine needles. I changed into a soaked underrobe and sat before the open window for half an hour, until my lips had turned white and my teeth chattered. Qingdai was so frightened that tears kept falling. but I had her put a bronze hand warmer beneath the bedding and press a hot cloth to my forehead. After that sequence of cold and heat, by the time the matron sent by Madame Chin touched my burning forehead through the bed curtains, I was coughing too hard to speak a complete sentence. The illness was 30% real and 70% performed for an audience. If the family physician examined my pulse carefully, I might not fool him, but Madame Chin merely had the matron glance at me from the doorway before waving impatiently. Since second miss is ill, she should not go near a crowd and pass the sickness to others. Eldest miss is busy. There is no need to disturb Madame. I lowered my eyes to hide the coldness at the corner of my mouth. Madame Chin was delighted I would not attend. Shen Mingju was even more delighted. Just after noon, chaos indeed erupted beside Kushui Lake. First came screams, followed by someone shouting that eldest miss had fallen into the water. Qingdai listened at the doorway for a moment, then ran back with a pale face. Young miss, eldest miss, truly fell into the lake. The Marquis of Yong'an happened to pass by and carried her out. Many ladies in the garden saw it. Eldest miss's clothes were soaked through. I lifted the hot ginger tea and took a slow sip, as long as she was rescued. Less than half an hour later, Shen Mingju burst into my courtyard wrapped in a thick cloak. Her hair was still wet, but her face showed none of the disorder of a recent fright. Instead, it glowed with a flush she could not suppress. What convenient timing for little sister to fall ill. She dismissed the maids and walked directly to my bedside. Her eyes moved from my pale face to the empty space at the foot of the bed, then finally settled on the trunks. Why did you not wear the cloak? I had a fever, how could I go out? I coughed twice. I heard elder sister fell into the water. Were you hurt? Shen Mingju stared at me, then suddenly smiled. I swallowed only a few mouthfuls of water and gained an excellent marriage in exchange. That can hardly be called an injury. The Marquis personally carried me ashore. Mother has already invited the old madam of his household to speak in the warm chamber. Little sister, you have no idea how great his future will be. She placed particular weight on the word future. I raised my eyes to her. She was looking at me as well. Her gaze held not only triumph, but a hatred I knew too well, like a flame burning back across the long years. Last time, I married a sickly man who could not live another 3 years in your place and endured every slight in an empty duke's residence. You became Madame Marquis after one fall into the water and followed Gu Jingming through promotion after promotion. She leaned down and enunciated every word. This time we will exchange places. I was not the only one who had returned. Shen Mingju had returned as well. When I remained silent, she assumed the blow had struck home and her smile grew brighter. Do not worry, little sister. If the Duke of Dingguo's household sends another gold card, I will certainly yield that rich marriage to you. Xiao Heng may be a collateral member of the imperial family, and his title sounds intimidating, but everyone in the capital knows he is riddled with illness. Even the imperial physicians say he cannot survive 3 years. You are young. After a few years as a widow, you can always marry again. In our previous life, after Xiao Heng died, she had said over and over that the sickly man ruined her life, but she did not know that Xiao Heng had not died of illness at all. Before I was locked inside the prayer hall, I once heard a secret in the fragments of Gu Jingming's drunken speech. Xiao Heng had been struck by 3 arrows in an ambush at Western Mountain. When his body was returned to the residence, the ducal household announced that his old illness had flared up only to conceal turmoil at court. The ambush had been so precise because someone had revealed his departure time, the number of his guards, and the places where he would change horses. Thinking about it now, the traitor had most likely been hidden in his chaotic inner household. Shen Mingju regarded him as a sick man fated to die young. It had never occurred to her that perhaps she was the one who threw the ducal gates wide open and handed the assassin the knife. I put down the bowl of soup and smiled at her. Then I thank elder sister for making it possible. Not long after she left, a steward serving father came with a message. The Marquis of Yong'an's household was willing to take responsibility. Gu Jingming had personally requested the hand of the eldest legitimate daughter of the Shen family. The 2 households had already reached an agreement in the warm chamber and would exchange birth charts in 3 days. Qingdai tucked the blanket around me and whispered, "The Marquis's marriage has been arranged so quickly. Is eldest miss not afraid she will regret it?" I looked at the barren branches thrashing in the cold wind outside the window and said mildly, "She has yearned for it through 2 lifetimes. How could she regret it?" There was only one thing Shen Mingju had never understood, even at death. The person who truly raised the Marquis of Yong'an's household to power in our previous life had never been Gu Jingming. It was me, and in this life I would not give him a single coin. On the 3rd day after Shen Mingju fell into the water, the Marquis of Yong'an's household sent a pair of live geese and formally presented the betrothal gifts. Gu Jingming was 24. He had inherited his title 5 years earlier, was handsome, and held an idle rank of lower 5th grade in the capital garrison. The noble Feigned of his household remained intact. Outsiders could see only the vermilion gates and the plaque bestowed by the late emperor. They could not see the deficit of 18,000 taels in the capital granary accounts, nor that the old Marquis had mortgaged 3 estates to a banking house before his death to fill a hole in the salt transport accounts. Naturally, Shen Mingju could not see those things either. All she remembered was that in her previous life, Gu Jingming entered the Ministry of Revenue at 30 and became Vice Minister at 33. With officials greeting him wherever he went, every tale of his glory that reached her beyond the high walls of the ducal residence became evidence upon which she staked everything in this life. The 2 families set the wedding for the 4th month. Madame Qin said the story of her daughter falling into the water could not be suppressed, and that the sooner the wedding took place, the more dignity could be preserved. Shen Mingju spent every day counting her dowry, wishing she could enter the Marquis's 8-bearer wedding sedan the very next day. Half a month later, the gold card from the Duke of Dingguo's household arrived as well. It was delivered not by an ordinary matchmaker, but by Xiao Heng's aunt, Grand Princess Changning. She entered with court ladies from the palace. A gold lacquered tray carried only a single betrothal card dusted with gold. Its wording was clear, in accordance with an old agreement between their grandfathers. Xiao Heng, Duke of Dingguo, sought the hand of an eligible daughter of Shen Rong, general who guards the frontier. The agreement dated back 20 years. When Xiao Heng's grandfather was still Prince An, he had saved my grandfather's life at the northern frontier. Over wine, the 2 old men agreed that if their descendants were close in age, their families would be joined by marriage. Later, Prince Anne's branch became implicated in an old case, and the rank of the family fell from prince to duke. The 2 houses gradually lost contact. Now Xiao Heng had suddenly revived the old agreement. Anyone perceptive could see that he did not necessarily want any particular daughter of the Shen family. He wanted a marriage that could block the palace from bestowing another bride upon him. Shen Mingju had already accepted the Marquis's betrothal gifts and naturally could not marry him. After Grand Princess Changning left, Madame Qin summoned me to the main courtyard. Father sat in the seat of honor, brows tightly furrowed. Shen Mingju leaned against Madame Qin's side, toying with the white jade pendant the Gu family had just sent her. "Juwei," Father said directly, "the Xiao and Shen families have an old agreement, and Grand Princess Changning personally delivered the gold card. We cannot refuse it. Your elder sister is already betrothed. You are the only one who can marry him." They had said the same thing in our previous life. It was as though I was not a daughter of the Shen family, only a brick that happened to fit the hole in an old marriage agreement. Shen Mingju deliberately sighed. "Do not be afraid. Little sister, the Duke of Dingguo, is merely sickly and somewhat cold in temperament. His household is noble, after all. You will be the lawful wife when you marry him. That is still better than being a concubine in an ordinary family." Madame Qing glared at her, yet her own words followed the same line. "Your elder sister may be blunt, but she is not wrong. You were born of a concubine. Becoming the lawful wife of a duke is already a rare honor." I neither wept nor protested. I simply rose and accepted the gold card Father held out. "Your daughter is willing to marry him." All 3 people in the room froze. Shen Mingju had probably prepared many words urging me to accept my fate. Not one was needed, leaving her almost disappointed. "You truly agree?" I ran my fingertip over the raised cloud pattern on the card. Since elder sister yielded the excellent marriage with the Marquis, naturally I should know what is good for me. Hearing the jealousy she imagined in my words, Shen Mingju finally relaxed. She thought I envied her. But I was wondering why Xiao Heng had sent the gold card at this particular time. In my previous life, trapped in the Marquis's residence, I knew only that he was sickly, reticent, and rarely received visitors. I had never examined why a dying man insisted on marrying a general's daughter at the most chaotic moment in the court. Looking at the card again now, I could almost see an unsheathed blade hidden beneath the gold dust. The wedding was fixed for the 9th month, a full 5 months after Shen Mingju's. When Madame Qin began dividing the dowries, Shen Mingju demanded first choice. The common funds of the general's residence had prepared 2 dowries. One followed the standard for the eldest legitimate daughter and filled 128 carrying cases. It contained coral trees, gilded screens, complete sets of jewelry, antiques, paintings, and calligraphy, as well as 4 shops and 3 farming estates. The other filled only 64 cases. Its contents were practical but unimpressive, consisting mostly of cloth, trunks, and everyday utensils. Under the original arrangement, the legitimate daughter would marry a duke while the illegitimate daughter married a marquis, so naturally the grander dowry would have gone to Shen Mingju. Now that the marriages had been exchanged, father was mindful of the Duke of Dingguo's dignity and intended to give me the 128 cases. Shen Mingju's eyes reddened on the spot. Though your daughter is marrying a marquis, I remain the Shen family's eldest legitimate daughter. Must I surrender even a legitimate daughter's dignity merely because little sister has climbed into a ducal household? Madame Qin immediately supported her. The argument gave father a headache, and at last he asked what I wanted. I placed a list I had prepared long ago on the table. Elder sister may have everything purchased from the common funds. I ask only for Inkstone Mountain Bookshop and Clear Heart Incense Shop, which my birth mother left me, along with the 7 cases of old books in the Western storehouse. I also ask father to separate all historical debts of the 2 shops from the common accounts. From this day onward, their profits and losses will have no connection to the general's residence. The room was silent for a moment, then Shen Mingju's laughter escaped her restraint. Think carefully, little sister. The roof of Inkstone Mountain Bookshop began leaking 3 years ago. Clear Heart Incense Shop owes 2 seasons of rent. Even wastepaper collectors would complain those boxes of mouldy books were too heavy. If you take them into the ducal residence, they will not give you prestige. I fear you will not even have silver to reward the servants. I have thought carefully. Afraid I might change my mind, Madame Qin immediately sent the accountants to fetch the deeds. Father may have felt a moment of pity because he added 20 cases of utensils from the common store, enough to provide an explanation to the Duke of Dingguo's household. The instant the seals fell upon the deeds, the heart that had hung suspended through 2 lifetimes finally settled securely in my chest. Madame Qin acted quickly and had the accountants deliver the shop deeds to my courtyard that very day. But when Qingdai held them to the light, she discovered that the deed to Clear Heart Incense Shop lacked the government's cross-page seal, while the boundary description for Inkstone Mountain Bookshop had been narrowed to remove half of the rear courtyard. Had I not examined them closely, then when I took those deeds to the authorities to register the new owner after my marriage, Clear Heart Incense Shop would have remained part of the common household property because its deed was incomplete. Madame Qin could then reclaim the bookshop's rear courtyard as ancestral Shen property. That half-courtyard looked insignificant, but it contained the bookshop's only well and the yard where paper was dried. If it was taken, the entire shop would cease operating. I carried the deeds directly to the outer study. Father was reading a Ministry of War document. He frowned when I entered. We have already given you the dowry you requested. What is it now? Your daughter came to ask father to finish the good deed properly. I circled the 2 problems, and had Uncle Joe present the original deeds from when my birth mother purchased the shops 20 years earlier. These were businesses mother bought with silver from her Sioux family dowry. They were never mixed with the Shen family's common property. If they are transferred under defective deeds today, the Duke of Dingguo's household may discover the problems while inspecting the dowry and believe father deliberately used invalid instruments to deceive his in-laws. Father valued appearances above all. He immediately summoned the accountants for questioning. The accountant first blamed insect damage from age, then claimed he had misread the boundary while copying it. Father ordered him beaten 10 strokes on the spot. By the time Madame Qin hurried over, the new red deeds had already been sent to the capital prefecture office for sealing, leaving no room to reverse the matter. She stood beneath the corridor and looked coldly at me. Are two broken shops worth making the family look so ugly? Because they are broken, I cannot afford to lose even one brick or tile, I replied. Elder sister has 128 cases of property to support her. This small amount of old property is all I have, so naturally I must guard it carefully. The words left Madame Chin unable to erupt. If she continued fighting, she would be admitting that she could not bear to give an illegitimate daughter even 2 genuine deeds. If she stopped, she could only watch the shops leave her control completely. After the new deeds returned, I entered Inkstone Mountain Bookshop through the front door as its owner for the first time. The fattiad was still only 2 bays wide, and the signboard deliberately retained its mottled old lacquer. Inside, however, it no longer resembled the place I had left upon marrying in my previous life. The front hall displayed newly printed primers, civil examination essays, and inexpensive, durable blank ledgers. More than a dozen artisans sorted paper in the rear courtyard. Uncle Joe placed the true general ledger in front of me. The secret account already held 36,000 taels in cash, with another 14,000 in outstanding receivables. Once young Miss marries, should we suspend the out-of-town business for a time? Uncle Joe asked. The ducal household has strict rules. If your husband does not allow you to appear publicly, we will not suspend it. I placed the Shao family's gold card beside the general ledger. I am not marrying in order to lock myself inside another courtyard. Before the 9th month, place every manager of the river warehouses under a 2-signature system. Any payment over 500 taels must bear the seals of 2 people. Divide the secret account among 3 institutions, so no one can withdraw all the silver with a single private seal. In my previous life, Gu Jingming had taken my shop so easily, not only because he was shameless, but because I placed the deeds, seals, accounts, and personal trust entirely in his hands. In this life, even if Xiao Heng and I one day became enemies, I would never again let anyone seize my lifeline in a single grip. Inkstone Mountain Bookshop and Clear Heart Incense Shop truly had been dilapidated once, but not now. Before my birth mother, Su Wantang, died, she entrusted the 2 shops to Uncle Joe, an old manager she had brought from the Shu family. Madame Chin understood nothing about business and collected only a small annual rent based on the old accounts. From the age of 12, I studied the books with Uncle Joe. I invested my meager allowance in the bookshop, hired unsuccessful examination candidates to collate rare texts, and had the incense shop begin selling portable, sleep-soothing incense cakes. To prevent Madame Chin from seizing the profits, Uncle Joe always kept 2 sets of accounts. The open accounts sent to the general's residence showed only rent. The true profits were deposited in a secret account under my name at 4 Seas Bank. Inkstone Mountain Bookshop now printed texts for 7 academies in the capital, while Clear Heart Incense Shop's goods travelled with caravans to Jiangnan. The 2 storefronts still look small, but their net profit exceeded 10,000 taels every 6 months. Nor were the 7 boxes of old books wastepaper. They contained my mother's notes on trade routes, illustrated records of the seals used by banks across the realm, and 30 years of Sioux family ledgers. In my previous life, those materials had allowed me to identify false warehouse receipts for Gu Jingming and extricate him from the military grain case. The 128 cases of dowry property Shen Mingju seized were indeed astonishing in number, but a coral screen could not cover a deficit. An imperially bestowed painting could not be sold. 3 of the 4 shops lost money year after year, and the farming estates still carried the tenants' unpaid rent from the previous year. What she took was the impressive-looking respectability the general's residence had stacked in its warehouses for years beautiful, but incapable of producing money. What I took was the river of silver that could truly be set in motion. On the 16th day of the 4th month, Shen Mingju married grandly into the Marquis of Yong'an's household. 10 li of red dowry cases blocked half of Vermilion Bird Street. When her sedan passed the wall of my courtyard, she deliberately had it pause and sent me an empty brocade box. A note lay at the bottom. When little sister becomes a widow, if you lack silver, you may come to the Marquis's household and beg me. After reading it, I tossed the note into the brazier. Qingdai's face turned red with anger. Eldest Miss has gone too far. There is no hurry. I closed the newly organized accounts of the incense shop. She will soon discover that what the Marquis's household lacks most is not a wife, but silver. In the second month after Shen Mingju married, the old madam of the Marquis of Yong'an's household sent someone to borrow 3,000 taels from the general's residence, ostensibly to repair the ancestral shrine. In the third month, Gu Jingming asked her to produce another 6,000 taels from the cash portion of her dowry, claiming he needed it to secure a real post in the capital garrison. By the 8th month, the 20,000 taels in cash that accompanied Shen Mingju's dowry was gone, and my wedding day arrived. The night before the wedding, Inkstone Mountain Bookshop sent over a new ledger. Uncle Joe had tucked an inconspicuous shipping slip into the final page. It recorded that the Duke of Dingwo's farming estate south of the city had purchased 30,000 dan of grain the previous year, yet only 18,000 dan had been delivered. The missing 12,000 dan had ultimately flowed to Hengtong Grain House, controlled by Chancellor Qin's nephew. A short line appeared on the back of the slip. For the past 6 months, the estate foreman responsible for inspecting the Duke of Dingwo's deliveries has been in frequent contact with a steward from the Marquis of Yong'an's household. I folded the paper and tucked it into my sleeve. As expected, the marriage sought by means of the gold card was not merely intended to block an imperial decree of marriage. On the 6th day of the 9th month, the Duke of Dingwo's household came to receive the bride. The entire capital expected a bleak wedding. Some said Xiao Heng was too ill to leave his bed and that a younger clansman would receive the bride in his place. Others said I was marrying him to ward off his bad fortune. So before the wedding sedan touched the ground, I would have to step over a brazier and then perform the wedding vows beside a rooster. But when the bridal procession reached the general's residence, Xiao Heng came in person. He wore vermilion wedding robes and sat astride Joye, a tall black horse. His face was indeed paler than an ordinary man's, but his shoulders and back were perfectly straight. Through the swaying curtain of beads, I saw only the hand holding the reins. His fingers were long and slender, with a newly formed callus between thumb and forefinger. A bedridden invalid too weak even to hold a brush should not have a callus left by practicing with a saber. He did not expose the rumours outside. He even coughed twice at appropriate moments during the wedding vows. Yet every step landed steadily, and his breathing never became disordered. Red candles burned high in the bridal chamber. After the guests dispersed, I sat alone for an hour before footsteps sounded outside. Xiao Heng had changed out of his elaborate ceremonial robes when he entered and wore only a dark red narrow-sleeved gown. He dismissed the wedding matron and maids, then closed the door himself. The nuptial wine on the table remained untouched. He did not lift my veil either, but stopped 3 paces away. "Second Miss Shen," he said coldly. "This marriage arose from an old agreement, though I also have selfish reasons. If you remain obedient and observe propriety, you will not lack the honours due to the wife of a duke. If you attempt to pry into the affairs of the outer courtyard or carry messages for the general's residence, I will show no mercy." I lifted the veil myself, removed the phoenix coronet that had made the bones of my neck ache, and placed it neatly on the dressing table. Xiao Heng's eyes darkened slightly. "Your Grace may rest assured, I will not carry messages for the general's residence, nor do I intend to inquire into matters I should not know." I removed the shipping slip from my sleeve and placed it beside the untouched nuptial wine. "But the South City estate is short 12,000 dan of grain. Its foreman falsified the accounts with Hengtong Grain House. If you do not investigate when the Ministry of Revenue inspects the warehouses in winter, that discrepancy will become evidence that the Duke of Dingwo's household privately sold military grain." Only the soft crackle of the candlewick remained in the room. Xiao Heng did not reach for the shipping slip. His gaze fell first upon my face. "Where did you obtain this?" "My shops sell paper and ink, and they also record cargo for caravans. When the figures from different routes are placed together, a few clues inevitably emerge." "Do you know who owns Hengtong Grain House?" "Han Ji, Chancellor Qing's nephew." At last, he walked to the table. In the candlelight, his pale face resembled a piece of cold jade, yet his eyes held none of an invalid's exhaustion. "Shen Jue, you appear to know too much." "Your Grace hides too much as well." I looked at his right hand. A man dying of illness does not walk without sound. Long-term medication would yellow his fingertips. Yours are not. The new callus between your thumb and forefinger came from practicing with a saber. Your left shoulder is slightly lower than the right because an old wound has not fully healed. Today you rode for an hour from the general's residence to the ducal residence. If your pulse were truly weak, it could not remain so steady now. The instant I finished speaking, cold light flashed from his sleeve, and a slender blade pressed against the side of my neck. I did not move. I merely placed another ledger on the table. Killing me is easy. But if you do, the trail hidden at the South City estate for 2 years will break. You feign illness so Chancellor Qin will believe there is no one capable among Prince An's old retainers, and expose every spy hidden in the ducal residence and capital garrison. You need someone who cannot be bought by Chancellor Qin, and can stabilize the inner household. I need an identity strong enough that Gu Jingming and the Shen family can never seize my shops again. The thin blade rested against my skin, its chill seeping inward. And so, he asked, and so we will not discuss love. We will discuss cooperation. I met his gaze. I will investigate the household deficit, protect the accounts and personnel, and use my trade routes to inspect grain and transmit messages that do not concern military secrets. You will give me the dignity of a lawful wife and freedom over my property. My dowry will remain mine forever, and the ducal household will not swallow my businesses. If the day comes when your great task succeeds and we still wish to remain husband and wife, we will. If not, give me a divorce instrument. Xiao Heng looked at me for a long time, then abruptly withdrew the knife. You have planned very thoroughly for yourself. A person who has suffered once ought to learn from it, he said. Once. I lowered my gaze and poured myself a cup of the nuptial wine without answering. Xiao Heng did not press me. He picked up the South City Estate shipping slip and read it, then leafed through the ledger I had brought. It arranged the records of 3 grain houses, 2 waterways, and the ducal warehouses side by side, making the missing amount obvious at a glance. We cannot touch the estate foreman yet, he said. I am keeping him as bait for the person behind him. We can leave him in place, but we must first seal the warehouses. Beginning tonight, all entries and withdrawals at the South City Estate will require 2 seals. The old seal will remain with the foreman as usual. One of your people will secretly verify each transaction with the new seal. That way, we neither startle the fish nor allow him to steal a single additional grain. He raised his eyes. You have even devised the method. I do not merely point out errors. After a moment of silence, Xiao Heng poured another cup of wine and lightly touched its rim to mine. Very well. The shops and dowry will remain yours forever. If the ducal household borrows your silver, it will issue a note at the prevailing market rate of interest. You will guard my inner household. I will shield you from the Shen family and the Marquis of Yong'an's household. I drained the wine, agreed. There is one more condition. What is it? Before outsiders, you and I are not allies. We are husband and wife. Xiao Heng looked at me, his tone still calm. Chancellor Qin is suspicious. A newly married couple who immediately sleeps in separate rooms will not fool him. I looked at the only bed in the bridal chamber. He followed my gaze, and the corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. I will sleep on the couch. That was probably the first moment all night when he seemed like a man with warmth. Before dawn the next morning, Nanny Shu, who served the old madam, came to summon me to offer tea. In front of everyone, Xiao Heng still appeared not to have recovered from his illness, and had to pause to cough after every few steps. But when the old madam asked whether the new bride understood the rules, he quietly took the scalding cup from my hands. She was tired last night. Mother, do not detain her too long. The expressions of the relatives in the room varied. The old madam looked at him, then at me. In the end, she gave me only a pair of jade bracelets and did not make things difficult. After we left Longevity Hall, Xiao Heng handed me a ring of bronze keys. These are duplicate keys to the outer treasury and 4 estates. Examine them first. There is no need to act hastily. And the general ledger? The chief steward, Du Cheng, keeps it. He is an old retainer left by my father and has served this household for over 20 years. I stopped walking. When Gu Jingming spoke of Xiao Heng's ambush at Western Mountain in our previous life, he once said that after the attack, the old steward named Du and his entire family vanished from the ducal residence. The estate foreman might have been only bait. The blade truly hidden in the inner household was likely the man Xiao Heng trusted most. I tightened my hand around the keys. Your Grace, before the end of today, I want to see every ledger in Du Cheng's custody. Xiao Heng glanced at me. You suspect him? I suspect anyone who refuses to let his ledgers see the light. Xiao Heng did not agree at once. He led me through a quiet corridor and stopped before the outer study. Ducheng is not an ordinary steward, he said. When my father was demoted in rank, more than half the old servants left. Ducheng remained with his family and guarded the residence for 3 years. He once took an assassin's blow for me, and he still walks poorly on his left leg. Without conclusive evidence, I cannot search him because of a single suspicion. Nor did I ask you to seize him now. I put away the duplicate keys, give him an opportunity in which he must choose. How? Lease word that tomorrow morning I will audit the South City estate and enter the missing grain in the dowry filing sent to the Ministry of Revenue. If he is loyal, he will warn you that this will startle our prey. If he is a traitor, he will act upon the ledgers and warehouse sealed tonight. Xiao Heng looked at me. You are making yourself bait. If he wants to stop the audit, destroying the evidence is more convenient than killing me. Besides, you promised to protect me. Surely you will not allow the 3rd day of our marriage to become the anniversary of my death. His brows drew together. He seemed to dislike how lightly I used the words anniversary of my death. But he still summoned Xin Zheng and ordered him to make the arrangements I proposed. That afternoon, I deliberately summoned 2 junior stewards from the South City estate to the account office, then had Qing Dai carry several blank ledgers past Ducheng. He glanced from a distance, his expression unchanged from any other day. He even personally instructed the kitchen to add a restorative soup to my meal. Had I not heard the words, Steward Du's entire family vanished. In my previous life, even I might have believed in his honesty. When the bowl of soup arrived on the 3rd night of my marriage, the silver needle did not change color, and the medicinal scent was unremarkable. I did not drink it. I had Qing Dai secretly pour it out for a chicken in the rear courtyard. Within 15 minutes, the chicken lay on the ground in a deep sleep. The drug was not fatal. It would make someone sleep for 2 hours, long enough for Ducheng to remove the ledgers, while the household believed the new bride was asleep. I returned the empty bowl to the tray. Through the paper window, I saw Chunxing, the maid who had delivered the medicine, pause beneath the corridor for a moment before hurrying away. The bait had been taken. The 3rd day after I married into the ducal household was also the day of my formal return to my maiden family. But before returning to the general's residence, I saw a loan request sent by the Marquis of Yong'an's household. It was written with exquisite courtesy. Gu Jingming had recently secured a substantive post at the grain office of the capital garrison and needed to cover the deficit of 18,000 taels left from the old Marquis's tenure. If it was not paid on time, the Ministry of Personnel would not issue his appointment. The Guer family temporarily lacked funds and wished to borrow 10,000 taels from the Duke of Dingguo's household. To be repaid in 3 months. Xiao Heng handed the letter to me. It is for you. The request was ostensibly addressed to the ducal household, but its final line read, As the 2 households are joined by marriage, we hope Madam will remember the affection between sisters. Shen Mingju plainly had no money left and had turned her attention to me. I instructed the gatekeeper to reply. The ducal household is presently auditing its old accounts and cannot extend loans. Madam's dowry consists entirely of an inheritance from her birth mother and has no connection to the common household estate. Less than half an hour later, Guiji, Shen Mingju's personal maid, came in person, stopped outside the 2nd gate. She was sweating with anxiety. Second miss. Eldest miss says the money is needed for only 3 months. Once the Marquis assumes a substantive post, what silver will he not be able to earn in the future? If you are concerned, you may temporarily pledge Clear Heart Incense Shop to the Marquis's household. I asked from behind the curtain, what will the Marquis's household pledge in return? Guiji choked. You are sisters. Why discuss collateral? If they refuse to pledge property, this is not a loan. It is a demand. I motioned for the gatekeeper to escort her out. Tell my elder sister that my shops will not fill the Gopamli's old hole. Guiji's expression was ugly when she left. That night, Uncle Joe returned with news from a brokerage familiar with the Marquis's household. In the 5 months since Shen Mingju married, the 20,000 taels in cash from her dowry had dwindled to a little more than 1,000. In the first month, to establish her prestige as Madame Marquis, she rewarded everyone in the household with 3 additional months of wages. In the second month, she decided the residence's furnishings were outdated, replaced every curtain in the main courtyard, and bought a set of Huanghuali furniture worth 2,000 taels. When Gu Jingming entertained officers of the capital garrison, she laid 20 tables for a single banquet and brought an opera troupe from Jiangnan to perform for 7 consecutive days. It was not that she had never tried to save herself. In the 6th month, she summoned the managers of the 4 dowry shops to the Marquis's residence, repeating fragments she remembered from our previous life. She instructed them to cut redundant workers, clear old inventory, and open new channels. Her words sounded convincing, but every instruction became distorted in practice. The jewelry shop employed 3 master craftsmen. Though their wages were high, each had his own established customers. Shen Mingju thought they used their seniority to act arrogantly, dismissed 2 of them at once, and hired young artisans recommended by Madame Qin's maiden family. The new artisans knew only how to reproduce old designs, and the hairpins and bracelets they made were thin and easily broken. She saved 80 taels in wages during the first month. In the second, a censor's wife's gold bracelet cracked, costing her 600 taels in compensation. The tea house held a batch of old tea that had become damp. Its manager wanted to sort it, press it into inexpensive tea bricks, and sell them to merchants from the north. Shen Mingju found the return too slow and ordered him to mix it with fresh tea and sell it at pre-rain prices. The first shipment had barely arrived at the residence of the Vice Minister of the Court of Imperial Sacrifices when the old madam, an expert in tea, exposed it. The Vice Minister's wife did not report the shop. She merely sent the tea back with a calling card. But half the ladies in the capital learned that Madame Yong'an was passing inferior goods off as superior. As for the antique shop that appeared most valuable, its storehouse did contain more than a dozen costly pieces of porcelain. Half, however, were consigned by customers and did not belong to the Shen family. Anxious to raise cash, Shen Mingju ordered the manager to clear inventory at a 30% discount and nearly sold other people's collections. Only when customers arrived with consignment contracts did she learn that held in inventory did not mean owned by the shop. After that series of disasters, she no longer trusted the managers and took back the seals of all 4 shops to keep personally. But from purchasing to dispatch, the shops produced dozens of orders every day. With every matter waiting for her seal, carts often lined up at the rear gate until late at night. The shops did not lose less money. Even their ordinary business became impossible. At first, Gu Jingming patiently comforted her. Later, when he discovered that every solution she devised opened another hole in the accounts, he finally threw the 4 shop seals onto the table in front of everyone. If you do not know how, let someone who does handle it. The prestige of being the eldest legitimate daughter does not automatically become business ability. Hearing the words eldest daughter, Shen Mingju assumed he was comparing her to me again and overturned the account table on the spot. She refused to admit that although she seized my position from the previous life, she had not acquired the abilities I spent more than 10 years learning. It was not that she did not know how to spend money. She did not know where money came from. When I married into the Marquis's household in our previous life, I faced the same deficit. I did not immediately fill it with cash. First, I discovered that 6,000 taels in the old granary accounts had been entered twice. Then, through connections left by Mother, I found several grain merchants who had handled the transport and asked them to testify. In the end, the actual amount we needed to repay was only 9,400 taels. With the remaining silver, I purchased a shipment of cheap old grain in Gu Jingming's name and resold it to horse farms in the north, earning back most of the money within 3 months. Gu Jingming later told outsiders that he had searched the old archives and managed the business skillfully. Shen Mingju remembered only that I used money to lay his path. She did not know how the money should be used, and still less that some holes never needed to be filled. In the main courtyard of the Marquis of Yong'an's residence, the argument continued from morning until afternoon. Guizhi later recounted the details to Qingdai in tears. Shen Mingju first produced a box of jewelry and suggested sending it to a pawn shop. The old madam of the Gu family slammed the table. You wore that red gold kingfisher feather jewelry set at your wedding. Everyone in the capital recognizes it the moment it enters a pawn shop. A censor's wife will learn that the Marquis's household cannot afford rice. Then sell a coral screen. That is an old object bestowed upon your father by the palace, and its origin is recorded in the dowry list. If you dare sell it, the palace can demand an explanation tomorrow. What about the estates? Surely the 3 farming estates from my dowry can be mortgaged for some silver. Gu Jingming threw the ledger in front of her. 1 was flooded, 1 has tenants in arrears, and 2 were already pledged by your mother as security for your elder brother. The only one that can be mortgaged is the estate west of the city, and a broker will offer no more than 3,000 taels. At last, Shen Mingju panicked. How can that be? Mother said my dowry was worth more than 100,000 taels. A book value of 100,000 does not mean you can produce 100,000 in cash tomorrow. Gu Jingming suppressed his anger. Did you not say Shen Jue has 2 shops? She produced money in our previous life. Why can she not produce any now? The room suddenly went quiet at those words. Shen Mingju jerked up her head. What do you mean, previous life? Gu Jingming's expression changed. He quickly corrected himself. I meant that she managed to make the shops profitable in the past. How could she have no silver now? Shen Mingju did not pursue the matter. She merely assumed panic had made Gu Jingming misspeak and completely failed to notice the fleeting shock and suspicion in his eyes. When I heard the story, I was sitting in the carriage taking me back to the general's residence with my new husband. King Dai whispered, Young miss, could the Marquis also, we cannot be certain yet. I lifted one corner of the curtain and looked at Xiaoheng riding ahead. But if he returned as well, the situation will only become more interesting. In our previous life, Gu Jingming never asked about the details of my business. He treated my contributions as his natural due. If he returned with his memories, he would assume that the same official fortune remained waiting for him, and even that sooner or later I would fill every deficit for him as I had before. But if a person remembers only how high he once stood and forgets who built the steps beneath his feet, then given another chance, he will only fall harder. Xiaoheng seemed to sense my gaze and looked back at the carriage. Today, he did not pretend to be excessively weak. He had merely applied a faint pallor to his lips and deliberately slowed his horse. When we reached the general's residence, he dismounted first and personally helped me from the carriage. The gate was crowded with people waiting to receive us. Shen Mingju stood among them. She wore a dark red gold-woven jacket that looked luxurious at first glance, though the cuffs had already begun to pill. The set of Eastern pearl jewelry she had loved before marriage was gone, replaced by 2 ordinary gold hairpins. Her gaze passed over me and settled on Xiaoheng's face, her expression slowly stiffening. On the 3rd day after her wedding in our previous life, Xiaoheng had suffered a flare-up of his old illness and had not accompanied her home. She returned alone in the ducal carriage and endured many veiled remarks from the women of her clan. In this life, Xiaoheng not only came, but also straightened the silk stole the wind had disturbed around my shoulders in full view of everyone. The steps are slippery, he said. Walk slowly. I placed my hand in his and heard the hushed exclamations around us. Shen Mingju forced a smile. Your Grace's health seems to have improved considerably. Xiaoheng replied mildly. My wife takes excellent care of me. Only I knew that we had been married for 3 days and all I had done was replace a bowl of medicine that might have been tampered with. I had not yet had time to take care of anything. He had said it deliberately for Shen Mingju to hear. At the family banquet, father was so courteous to Xiaoheng that he seemed almost constrained. Gu Jingming arrived late, dark shadows beneath his eyes. The first person he looked at upon entering was not Shen Mingju. It was me. I knew that gaze too well. It held scrutiny, astonishment, and the gloom of a man from whom everything had been taken. During the meal, father asked about the capital garrison appointment. Gu Jingming said only that he was still raising the money needed for the granary deficit. Xiaoheng lifted his teacup and said casually, Old granary accounts often contain duplicate entries. Marquis Gu might first examine the transport ledgers from the 12th through 14th years of Jinghe. It would be a pity to fill the entire amount blindly with cash. The wine cup in Gu Jingming's hand shook violently. Those were the precise years I had identified for him in our previous life, and I had mentioned that detail only to Xiaoheng the night before. Xiaoheng was not helping him. He was testing him. After a moment of silence, Gu Jingming suddenly looked at me. Does second sister share that view? I took a piece of steamed sea bass with my chopsticks and answered ordinarily. I have married into the Xiao family. It would not be appropriate for me to comment on the Gu household's accounts. His fingers slowly tightened. In the carriage on the way home, Xiao Heng rested against a soft cushion with his eyes closed and asked, "Can we be certain now? Certain of what?" "He knows about the old accounts from the 12th year of Jinghe, and he was waiting for you to speak for him." I turned toward him. "Do you believe a person can die and return to life?" Xiao Heng opened his eyes. "Their depths unfathomable. I did not before. After marrying you, I can believe half of it." Before I could answer, the carriage stopped abruptly. Outside, a guard reported in a low voice, "Master Du Cheng has disappeared. The concealed cabinet in the account office was forced open, and one of the 2 warehouse seals for the South City estate is missing." The sickly cast vanished completely from Xiao Heng's face in an instant. He sat upright, his gaze as cold as an unsheathed blade. Seal the residence. When the 4 gates of the ducal residence were locked, dusk had just begun to fall. News of Du Cheng's disappearance did not reach the outer courtyard. Xiao Heng had dinner set out in the front hall as usual, and even invited the imperial physician who regularly treated him. Outsiders were told only that His Grace had exhausted himself during the return visit, and that his old illness had flared again. Servants from the various courtyards were forbidden to walk around at will, ostensibly to avoid disturbing the imperial physician. The residence seemed quiet, but the hidden guard had already changed 3 times. I went straight to the account office. The bronze lock on the concealed cabinet had been forced with a sharp tool, leaving fresh scratches on the door. 2 volumes of the general ledger were missing, along with the South City Estate's grain inspection book. Beneath the window lay a small patch of wet mud mixed with fine white sand. Within the residence, that particular river sand appeared only outside the western corner gate. Qin Zheng, commander of the guards, said, "This subordinate has inspected the western corner gate." At the late afternoon watch, a cart carrying kitchen waste left the residence. The guard saw the identification token of Steward Du and did not open the barrels. He was not necessarily in the barrels. I crouched to examine the wet mud. The kitchen waste cart travels through the rear kitchen lane and does not pass the account office. If Du Cheng personally forced open this cabinet and then hurried to the rear lane, the soles of his shoes should carry grey dust from the paving stones, not white sand. Someone deliberately scattered this beneath the window to make us think he escaped through the western corner gate. Qin Zheng frowned. "Madam means that he is still in the residence. At the very least, the ledgers are." Xiao Heng stood in the doorway without interrupting. He only motioned for me to continue. I opened the ledgers left on the table. After managing the ducal household for 20 years, Du Cheng's writing habits were extremely consistent. He closed every month's books with the same pine soot ink. Only the numerals altered over the past 3 months shone with an unnatural gloss. They had been written in quick-drying ink mixed with tung oil, which dried rapidly without bleeding into the paper. It was most commonly used in the account office of Hengtong Grain House south of the city. If he truly intended to defect, he would not take only 2 ledgers. The books he removed proved the estate foreman sold grain illegally, but he left traces of the dealings with Hengtong Grain House here, as though eager to pin every crime on the foreman. I held the paper close to the lamp. The thing he truly needed to carry away was the warehouse seal. The missing old seal can be used to stamp forged warehouse receipts. If it leaves the city before midnight, a shipment of false grain will enter the capital granary tomorrow under the name of the Duke of Dingguo's household. Qin Zheng immediately said, "This subordinate will pursue the kitchen waste cart." "There is no need," Xiao Heng said. "The cart has already been detained at the city gate. It held only 2 bound labourers and nothing else." That proved the other party wanted to lure the household's finest men away. I suddenly remembered the replaced bowl of soup from the bridal chamber. The young maid who brought it said the kitchen prepared it and Chunxing, who served beside Nanny Xu, delivered it. Chunxing was 16 and Du Cheng's niece. Longevity Hall. Xiao Heng and I said almost simultaneously. The old madam's longevity hall lay outside the scope of the search of the 4 gates. Du Cheng had served the old duke, and the old madam always trusted him. Out of respect for their elder, the household guards would not enter casually. When we reached Longevity Hall, the courtyard gates were tightly closed. No lamps burned inside, but the sound of furniture colliding faintly emerged from the western side room. Qin Zheng kicked open the door. Chung Xing was pushing a bronze casket into the brazier. Du Cheng had not fled. Dressed in the grey clothes of a menial eunuch from the old madam's courtyard, he hid behind a screen with a short crossbow already drawn. The instant the door burst open, he raised it and fired at Xiao Hang. I had been prepared. I seized the heavy bolster beside the door and threw it. The bolt pierced the brocade, veered half a foot, and embedded itself in the doorframe. Qin Zheng immediately lunged and pinned Du Cheng to the ground. Seeing the situation turn against her, Chung Xing pulled out a hairpin and tried to drive it into her own throat. I caught her wrist. The point grazed my palm, opening a bloody cut. As she struggled, she cursed. "You wretch! If not for your meddling, he would have died from the medicine long ago." Xiao Heng's gaze fell upon my bleeding hand, and his expression became colder than it had been when facing the crossbow. By the time the bronze casket was pulled from the brazier, its edges had blackened. In addition to the missing warehouse seal and 2 grain inspection books, it contained an exceptionally detailed map of Western Mountain. The map marked Xiao Heng's route out of the city to honor his ancestors on the 3rd day of the 10th month, 2 posting stations where he would change horses, and the number of guards accompanying him. The ambush that caused him to die of illness in our previous life had already been arranged at this point. Before Du Cheng was taken to the dungeon, Xiao Heng asked him, "My father treated you generously." Du Cheng knelt on the ground, his face ashen, but suddenly laughed. "The old duke treated me well, so I guarded his secret for 20 years. But he is dead. The court now belongs to Chancellor Qin. You are only a sickly man stripped of princely rank. What gives you the right to fight them? I merely wanted to leave a path of survival for my descendants. A road purchased with your master's life may not be one your descendants dare walk," Xiao Heng instructed Qin Zheng. "Question him through the night. Do not alert Chancellor Qin yet." After they took him away, the old madam finally emerged from the prayer room with Nanny Shu supporting her. Chung Xing had burned a calming incense for her, and she had only just awakened. When she learned of Du Cheng's betrayal, she held the doorframe and stood in silence for a long time. At last, she handed me the sandalwood casket representing authority over the household. "Henger said you understood accounts. At first, I did not believe him." She looked at the wound in my palm. "From this day forward, you will manage the household finances, estates, and shop. You need not preserve my dignity when dealing with these people who eat from the household while betraying it." The casket contained every treasury key and business seal belonging to the Duke of Dingguo's household. On the 3rd day of my marriage, I obtained financial authority over the entire ducal residence. But obtaining the keys was only the first step. Over the next 2 months, I summoned all 12 shop managers and 6 estate foremen back to the capital and verified 3 years of accounts transaction by transaction. One person falsely inflated wastage at the silk shop. Another paid rent on prime farmland at the rate for wasteland. A third used the old madam's devotion to Buddhism to steal 300 taels every month from incense expenditures. Those only lightly implicated were transferred away from positions of authority after making the missing funds good. Anyone who dealt with Hengtong Grain House was handed directly to Xiao Heng's men for questioning. The hardest business to investigate was Auspicious Brocade House. Its manager, Loe Gi, kept beautiful books. Every bolt of silk carried signatures from purchase to release, yet the shop had lost more than 20,000 taels over 3 years. He explained that Jiangnan prices had risen year after year while plain colors had become fashionable in the capital. Old patterns did not sell, so he had been forced to clear them at a loss. The old madam had heard the explanation several times and always assumed that fortune had turned against the shop. I did not begin by examining the silver. I ordered the staff to find every fabric sample from purchases made over the past 3 years. All were recorded as superior Huzhou silk. The sample from 2 years earlier had a close weave. The previous year's was 10% thinner and the current year's thinner by another 10%. The purchase price, however, rose each year. Luo Gui did not lack selling ability. He colluded with the supplier, passed inferior silk off as superior, and divided the difference. As for the so-called slow-moving old inventory, the books listed 3,000 bolts, while the warehouse held only 800. He had long since transported the rest to a fabric shop operated by his wife's family, and sold them a second time. Luogai continued denying the accusations as he knelt in the courtyard. Madam accuses this humble man of stealing silver based on a few scraps of cloth. If word spreads, who will dare work for the princely household in the future? I had 3 looms carried in and invited an elderly weaver from the embroidery workshop that preceded the women's school to examine the threads publicly. She unravelled 1 inch of cloth and counted the warp, then soaked it in water. The inferior silk immediately lost colour and shrank. Not one of the managers watching dared speak for Luogai again. People who do honest work need not fear me. I spread the supply contract before the crowd. The people who should fear me are those who use the princely household's silver to support their own shop. The goods and silver Luogai swallowed total 14,700 taels. 10,000 must be returned within 3 days, with the remainder repaid by transferring the fabric shop owned by his wife's family. If he refuses, he will be sent to the authorities together with the charge of forging contract. Luogai had assumed I would protect the household's reputation and dispose of the matter privately. When he heard the words "sent to the authorities," he finally collapsed. His wife's family delivered the shop deed that same day. I did not close the fabric shop. I replaced its manager and had it specialize in moderately priced, durable cotton cloth. The tenant farmers, guards, and servants of the ducal household all needed new clothes every year. Rather than buying through layers of middlemen, we could place orders with our own shop at market price. Auspicious Brocade House retained only genuine high-grade silk and no longer filled its warehouse with overpriced goods. Once the 2 shops were separated, one supplied volume and the other preserved reputation. By the 2nd month, both had stopped the previous losses. I did not simply dismiss people. The ducal household controlled extensive businesses. Replacing every long-serving employee would only halt operations. I converted the account office to a 3-signature system, separating purchasing, inspection, and payment. Estate rents were set within a range tied to production, falling in disaster years and rising in abundant ones. Old material overstocked at the silk shop was no longer dumped at a low price, but given to Clear Heart Incense Shop to make sachets and book covers. Inkstone Mountain Bookshop received the printing order for the ducal clan school, reducing costs while allowing the 2 sides of the business to sustain one another. By the 12th month, the ducal household had recovered a deficit of 47,000 taels. 3 shops that had lost money for 5 consecutive years showed a net profit for the first time. After Xiao Heng examined all the accounts, he asked only, "What reward do you want?" Under our agreement, the ducal household will pay market rates for purchases from my shops. Only that. Even close brothers should keep clear accounts, much less allies. Leaning behind his desk, he looked somewhat helpless. "Shen Jue, do you intend to convert every favor into silver so that you will never owe anyone anything?" I closed the ledger. Silver debts can be repaid. Debts of favor are difficult. Xiao Heng said nothing more. The next day, Inkstone Mountain Bookshop received its first payment from the ducal household, 10% above the market price. Accompanying the payment was not additional gold or silver, but a contract bearing the seal of the ducal household. It stated that all private property under my name would remain outside the Xiao family's common accounts, and that no one could seize it in the name of the clan or of marriage. I held the contract and looked at it for a long time. In my previous life, I had offered Gu Jingming everything I owned and received only the words, "Husband and wife should naturally act with one heart." In this life, Xiao Heng did not speak a single flattering sentence. He put the escape route I valued most in black and white. That night, he returned from the outer courtyard with a thin layer of snow on his shoulders. I asked Qingdai to bring ginger tea. When he accepted it, he saw the scab that had formed over the wound in my palm and suddenly said, "I changed the route to Western Mountain for the ancestral rite." Has Ducheng confessed to half of it? He only passed information from the inner residence. The people who arranged the ambush belonged to the grain office of the capital garrison. Xiao Heng placed a list before me. One of the deputy commissioners entered Gu Jingming's service 3 days ago. At the bottom of the list was a name I had seen countless times in my previous life. Hanji Chancellor Qin's nephew, and the elder brother of the honored concubine Gu Jingming later brought into his household. I raised my head. Chancellor Qin has already reached into the Marquis of Yong'an's household. Looking at the snow outside the window, Xiao Heng said mildly. He did not reach into it. Gu Jingming opened the door himself. Before New Year's Eve, Father sent an invitation asking Xiao Heng and me to return to the general's residence for the year-end banquet. He sent the invitation 3 times. The first said only, "Return with your husband." The second added a few words of concern. The third was written in Father's own hand and vaguely mentioned the recent financial difficulties of the Marquis of Yong'an's household, expressing the hope that the sisters would be less particular when they met. After reading it, I handed it to Xiao Heng. "Will you go?" he asked. "Yes." I asked Qingdai to put away the New Year gifts for father and grandmother. Some things cannot be explained clearly through 2 sets of gates. I will say them once in person, and then there will be no need to say them again. Xiao Heng understood, without asking more. He instructed Qinzheng to postpone the discussions originally scheduled for the 2nd day of the new year. In recent months, he no longer concealed everything from me. I knew he was the only surviving legitimate grandson of Prince Anne's line. His grandfather had been falsely accused of amassing troops for personal power, causing the family rank to be reduced from prince to duke. Before his death, the late emperor left a secret edict authorizing Xiao Heng to investigate the old case and corruption in military grain. The current emperor now lingered on a sick bed. While the crown prince was only 9, Chancellor Qin and Prince Gong had joined forces to control the 6 ministries. Xiao Heng feigned illness not only to survive, but also to persuade Prince Gong's faction that he posed no threat and induced them to expose their operations. Du Cheng was merely the first severed line. Following Han Ji, they had discovered 7 officials at the capital garrison grain office who had long overstated warehouse receipts. But to uproot the entire group, they needed to wait until a grain shipment large enough to command the imperial attention entered storage. That shipment would leave Jiangnan after the beginning of spring. A light snow fell on the day we returned to the general's residence. Just as the ducal carriages turned onto the long street, they met the carriage of the Marquis of Yong'an's household at the mouth of the lane. The Gu family carriage was the same one used at Shen Mingju's wedding, but the gold thread on its curtains had dulled, and the right wheel tilted slightly. My carriage came from Xiao Heng's private treasury. Its exterior was not piled with gold or jade, but its body was made from whole panels of ebony. Windproof bronze bells hung at the 4 corners, and a thick rug from the western regions covered the interior. Only 12 guards rode before and behind us, but everyone sat straight-backed and carried the unmistakable bearing of a battle-hardened elite. The 2 carriages stopped one behind the other at the gates of the general's residence. Shen Mingju descended first. She had changed into a brand-new silver-red cloak trimmed at the collar with a ring of fine fox fur. Seen closely, however, the stitching looked hurried, and the fur was not original to the cloth. The material had been cut from and remade out of her wedding dress. When she saw Qingdai helping me from the carriage, her gaze lingered on my moon-white cloud brocade for a long time. The fabric bore no gaudy red or green design, only a dark gleam like water that appeared when I moved. It was a New Year gift Grand Princess Changning had sent from the palace a few days earlier. "Little sister truly lives lavishly now," Shen Mingju said with a smile. "I heard you replaced more than half the managers in the ducal household, and even ask how much incense the old madam burns in her devotions. People outside say the Duke of Dingguo did not marry a wife, but an iron abacus. Keeping accurate accounts is still better than taking an ancestral screen to a pawn shop for a price." The smile froze on her face. Gu Jingming approached from behind. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him. He still wore the colors of a marquis, but an inescapable restlessness weighed between his brows. When Xiao Heng dismounted, Gu Jingming instinctively stepped back half a pace. Realizing his loss of composure, he forced himself to cup his hands. "Your Grace's complexion continues to improve, thanks to my wife." Xiao Heng gave the same answer. He passed me a hand warmer without allowing his gaze to linger on Gu Jingming for even a moment. "It is cold outside. Let us go in." That dismissal humiliated Gu Jingming more than open hostility. He had believed Xiao Heng had only 2 years to live, and that the Marquis of Yong'an's household was the future great house. Now he discovered that the sickly man stood in the snow like a green pine, while he himself could not even untangle an old granary deficit. Before the year-end banquet began, Madame Qin summoned me to an inner room. In addition to Father, Shen Mingzhu and a matron sent by the Gu old madam were present. A promissory note lay on the table. The requested amount had fallen from 10,000 to 6,000 taels, with Shen Mingzhu's dowry estate west of the city offered as collateral. Madame Qin spoke first. "Juwei, your elder sister is not taking your money for nothing. The estate is worth at least 8,000 taels at market price. If she pledges it to you for 3 months, you will suffer no loss." I picked up the estate deed and examined it. This estate was pledged to Huitong Bank 1 month ago for a loan of 3,000 taels. Pledging it to me now creates 2 liens on 1 property. If I take this note to the authorities, the steward of the Marquis's household will face a lawsuit. The Guy family matron's expression changed at once. Madam must not make groundless accusations. There is a hidden mark from Huitong Bank on the back of the deed. It is visible only when held to the light. I moved the paper to the window, and a pale blue-paired fish design immediately appeared. "Go back and ask who sent an already mortgaged property here to swindle Silver." Madame Qin had not expected this either. She turned toward Shen Mingzhu. Avoiding her gaze, Shen Mingzhu suddenly raised her voice. "It is only 6,000 taels. You now control hundreds of thousands in ducal property. Must you be so calculating? In our previous life, you gave Gu Jingming far more than 6,000. Why? Now that I am Madame Marquis, will you not produce a single coin?" Father did not understand the words previous life. Frowning, he asked what she was talking about. I understood, cornered beyond escape. She finally could no longer conceal it. "Because I was stupid," I said, placing the deed back on the table. "I was stupid once. I have no intention of being stupid twice. Since elder sister knows Gu Jingming will enjoy a brilliant official career, you should trust even more in his ability to earn those 6,000 taels himself. Why come begging at the door of an illegitimate younger sister fated to become a widow?" Shen Mingzhu choked, her face turning alternately green and white. Madame Qin snapped. "Between sisters, why speak of begging? Your birth mother's shop survived only under the protection of the Shen family. Now that you are being asked to take out a small amount in an emergency, is that not your duty? Mother is right." I accepted a stack of old accounts from Qingdai. That is why I specially brought all the rent the shops paid to the general's residence over the years. Since Mother's death, Inkstone Mountain Bookshop and Clear Heart Incense Shop paid rent each year according to contract and never fell behind. Repairs to the buildings and repayment of debts were borne entirely by the shop. The general's residence neither invested a single tael nor defended me from a single creditor. Where was this supposed protection? I placed the private property contract Xiao Heng had executed for me on top. Father personally assigned the 2 shops to me, and the ducal household has affixed its seal confirming them as private property. In Father's presence today, I will say this for the last time. When the Shen family holds a funeral or wedding, I will give the appropriate gift. If Father falls ill, I will fulfill a daughter's duty. But the deficit of the Marquis of Yong'an's household, Gu Jingming's official position, and elder sister's prestige as a noble wife have nothing to do with me. If anyone again invokes family affection to force me to fill those holes, I will take the ledgers and deeds to the capital prefecture office and ask the prefect to rule according to law. Father looked at the stack of deeds bearing his own seal and remained silent for a long time. At last, he waved a hand. "The matter ends here. No one is permitted to borrow silver from Juwei again." Shen Mingzhu shot to her feet with red-rimmed eyes. "Father is biased." For the first time, Father did not soothe her. "You chose the 128 cases of dowry yourself. Juwei took only the 2 shops everyone called ruined at the time. Now that the shops earn money, I am biased. If they were still losing money, would you repay their debts for her?" Shen Mingzhu could not answer and stormed out through the curtain. When I left the inner room, Xiao Heng was waiting beneath the corridor. He did not ask how the conversation went. He merely handed me a cup of hot tea. It was at the perfect temperature to drink. plainly having been replaced twice. You were not going to enter and support me, I asked. You brought 6 ledgers, 3 deeds and the statutes of the capital prefecture office. Did you need me to speak for you? He looked at the tightly closed door of the inner room. Had I entered, they would only believe you were using your husband's family to oppress them. Once you say it clearly yourself, that door can truly remain closed in the future. Holding the cup, I suddenly felt that the escape route I always left for myself was not quite as cold as it had once been. Halfway through the banquet, Gu Jingming blocked me in the corridor leading to the privy. So you returned as well, he said at once. No one stood beneath the corridor. The sound of strings and flutes drifted through the curtain of snow from the distance. I was unsurprised and merely looked at him. When did Marquis Gu return? 1 month before you married. His gaze was urgent and heavy. Jue, things should not have reached this point. The fire in the western courtyard was not my intention in our previous life. Members of the Qin family got me drunk that night. By the time I learned what happened, it was too late. I later punished the gatekeepers. And so you believe that given another life I should still examine your accounts, produce money for you, and wait until you have time to punish the people who killed me. He reached for me, but I turned aside. I know you resent me, but marrying Xiaoheng will end badly. He will die within 3 years. Chancellor Qin and Prince Gong will never allow him to live. Give me the old accounts your mother left and lend me 10,000 taels. I can still enter the Ministry of Revenue as I did in our previous life. Once Xiaoheng dies, I can bring you out of the ducal residence. He spoke with such certainty, as though this were the greatest mercy he could offer me. I could not help laughing. Gu Jingming, do you still believe that in our previous life you walked those roads by yourself? What do you mean? I found the duplicate entries in the Jinghe granary accounts. I sold the shipment of old grain to the northern horse farms. I identified Hengtong Grain House's false warehouse receipts using old Su family seal records. Of the 3 memoranda on grain policy you submitted to the Emperor, I wrote 2, and Uncle Joe asked an old canal transport clerk to revise the 3rd. Without those things, you could not even enter the grain office of the capital garrison. His face turned white inch by inch. I walked past him, then paused after 1 step. In this life, no one will build the stairs for you. If you truly have ability, walk the road yourself and show me. A soft cough sounded from the corner of the corridor. Wrapped in a black cloak, Xiaoheng stepped out. He looked as though he had just arrived or had been listening for a long time. He did not look at Gu Jingming. He simply took my hand naturally. My wife, the snow is growing heavy. His palm was warm and his grip steady. On the way home, Qin Zheng galloped up to the carriage and delivered a secret letter that had just been intercepted. Han Ji had written to Gu Jingming, inviting him to serve as deputy commissioner for the Jiangnan military grain transport in the coming year, and promising to recommend him for the Ministry of Revenue after the task was complete. Xiaoheng read it and passed the letter to me. Will he accept? I remembered the resentment in Gu Jingming's eyes. He will. He wants too badly to prove he can win without me. What we did not know was that in the other carriage, Shen Mingju was also forcing Gu Jingming to tell the truth. After returning from the year-end banquet, she drove Guiji and every servant from the main courtyard and locked the door. Why did you ask her about the old Jinghe accounts today? And why did you say previous life? She stared at Gu Jingming. Did you die once as well? At first, Gu Jingming denied it. Then Shen Mingju recounted her memories one by one. The year he became Vice Minister of Revenue, the day the Qin woman entered the household, and the purple official robe he wore on the night I died in the western courtyard fire. Gu Jingming's expression finally changed. If you knew all this, why did you not tell me sooner? If I had told you, would you still have married me? Shen Mingju sneered. You would only have waited beside Kushui Lake for Shen Jue and pushed me toward Xiaoheng. At least she could help me. Those 5 words enraged her completely. A teacup shattered beside Gu Jingming's feet, spraying porcelain across the floor. She helped you in our previous life because she held the position of Madame Marquis. Now I am your wife. Her shops, old accounts, and trade routes will never be yours again. If you are truly capable, earn the position yourself. Stop staring at her every day like a dog waiting for its master to feed it. Gu Jingming raised his hand to strike her. His palm stopped in midair and finally came down heavily on the edge of the table. Fine. He took out Hanji's secret letter. A shipment of military grain will leave Jiangnan after the beginning of spring. In our previous life, this was the assignment that brought me into the Ministry of Revenue. You do not remember what occurred in the middle, but I remember the result when Hanji's corruption was exposed. I presented the evidence to the Emperor. His Majesty personally praised my loyalty and integrity. Seeing the hidden seal of Chancellor Qin's residence at the bottom of the letter, Shen Mingju's anger slowly yielded to hope. Then accept, she said. Did Shen Jue not say you could accomplish nothing without her? Once you return after escorting the grain, make her watch you enter the Ministry of Revenue again. Both remembered the final reward from their previous life, but neither was willing to think carefully about who had made up the missing grain across thousands of li of waterways and roads from Jiangnan to the northwest, or who had identified the false seal that could bring down Hanji Tai. They removed me from their memories, leaving only a fortune they believed destined to fall into their hands. After the beginning of spring, the court ordered the purchase of 300,000 dan of military grain from Jiangnan, to be transported to the northwest by 3 routes. Chancellor Qin recommended his nephew Han Ji as Chief Transport Commissioner and Gu Jingming as deputy. On the day their appointments arrived, the Marquis of Yong'an's household held a great banquet. Wearing the Eastern Pearl jewelry set she had redeemed, Shen Mingju accepted everyone's congratulations, as if the promissory notes and arguments of the previous months had never existed. She even sent an invitation through Guiji. It said that once Gu Jingming returned to the capital with the grain, his military merit would carry him into the Ministry of Revenue. Then the sisters could share in glory and write off every past grievance. I placed the invitation beneath the corner of the desk and continued checking freight rates along 3 waterways. I had waited 6 full months for this military grain case. In my previous life, it was this same shipment that truly carried Gu Jingming into the center of power. Hanji intended to pass old grain off as new, use sand mixed into the sacks to achieve the required weight, and send the difference into the private treasuries of Chancellor Qin and Prince Gong. From loading records kept by caravans across the region, I discovered that only 220,000 of the 300,000 dan had been purchased. I advised Gu Jingming not to sign the acceptance documents and transferred 80,000 dan from northern reserves to cover the shortage. Gu Jingming then rushed to present the evidence to the emperor first, accused Hanji in turn, saved the army's grain, and earned imperial praise to preserve the broader situation. Chancellor Qin did not retaliate. Instead, he drew Gu Jingming into his faction. Gu Jingming enjoyed the reputation for integrity I earned for him while allying by marriage with the Qin family, and finally brought Hanji's younger sister into the Marquis's residence. In this life, I would not replace the missing 80,000 dan for him, nor warn him not to sign the acceptance documents. But 100,000 soldiers in the northwest could not be allowed to starve because of my hatred. Xiao Heng and I made another set of preparations in advance. Inkstone Mountain Bookshop maintained paper material warehouses at 12 river docks, while the caravans of Clear Heart Incense Shop travelled between the capital and Jiangnan year-round. Under the pretext of purchasing the new wheat crop, we bought 80,000 dan in dispersed transactions and stored it temporarily in 3 inconspicuous civilian granaries. None of the contracts used the name of the ducal household, and they did not pass through the same bank. Chancellor Qin's men would assume only that merchants were stockpiling before the spring shortage. Grain hoarding was one of the easiest ways to make silver and one of the easiest ways to harm people. 80,000 dan was no small amount. If we raised prices in a rush to buy, the people of Jiangnan would be unable to afford rice before the military grain case even erupted. I had Uncle Joe execute 2 kinds of contracts with local grain merchants. The first purchased old grain from the previous year at market rates. Merchants had to produce actual warehouse receipts and could not sweep up grain from the market at the last moment. The second consisted of advance purchases of the new wheat crop. We paid a 30% deposit and would take only surplus grain from each estate after harvest, without touching official stores or the food needed by farming families. In exchange, the fleet of Clear Heart Incense Shop carried their northbound and southbound goods at half the usual freight rate. One manager found the process too slow and proposed adding 20 cash per Dalton N, saying the full amount could be secured within 3 days. I rejected it on the spot. Military grain exists to protect the people, not to be stolen from the bowls of another group of people. If we use our money to drive prices upward today, Chancellor Qin can accuse Prince An's faction of hoarding grain and disrupting the market tomorrow. The grain will never leave, while the crime will already appear proven. To prevent all 3 civilian granaries from being seized at once, I divided the warehouse receipts into 24 lots, each corresponding to a different boat owner and delivery date. Only Uncle Joe, Xiao Hung, and I knew every location. Even the black armor guards assigned to protect the shipments received only the map for their own route. The arrangement seemed cumbersome, but it saved the entire shipment once the military grain case erupted. Meanwhile, using the late Emperor's secret edict, Xiao Heng secretly summoned 200 black armor guards, disguised as boatmen, trackers, and dock accountants. They infiltrated all 3 grain fleets. On the night before Gu Jingming left the capital, Shen Mingju personally went to his study. Their conversation was later recorded in Guiji's testimony. In our previous life, this assignment brought you into the Ministry of Revenue. If you simply act as you did before, nothing can go wrong. Shen Mingju produced her last box of cash. These 5,000 taels came from selling the estate west of the city. Use them to secure Commissioner Han's favor. Once you return, we will have everything. Gu Jingming asked, do you remember what problem occurred when the grain was inspected in our previous life? I know only that Hanji's corruption was exposed in the end and that you rendered great service. Who discovered that the grain figures were wrong after a moment of silence? Shen Mingju answered impatiently. Who else could it have been? Naturally, it was you. Shen Jue merely understands a few petty merchants' tricks. Do not let a few words from her frighten you. She has attached herself to Xiao Heng now and deliberately claims every achievement from the past as her own. Gu Jingming did not argue. He accepted the silver and sailed south with the fleet the next day. For the first month, everything went smoothly. Hanji had the purchasing documents record the full 300,000 dan, while the boats actually carried 240,000, including 40,000 dan of moldy old grain. The remaining 60,000 dan shortage was disguised by filling the bottoms of sacks with river sand and placing half a sack of good grain on top. Ordinary inspections sampled from the mouths of the sacks and would rarely discover it. Gu Jingming was not entirely ignorant. He personally saw people carrying sand onto the boats at night, and he saw grain prices in the books that were 30% above market rates. He hesitated. But when Hanji produced a recommendation written by Chancellor Qin himself, he still stamped the private seal of the Marquis's household on 12 acceptance documents. His reasoning was perfectly clear. The same assignment had become a shortcut to promotion in his previous life, which meant someone would ultimately rescue the situation. Even if Shen Jue refused to intervene, Chancellor Qin would never permit anything to happen to Prince Gong's military grain. The one thing he did not expect was that Chancellor Qin had intended from the beginning to make him the scapegoat. When the grain fleet reached the mouth of Bianshui Gorge, heavy rain fell for 7 consecutive days. The third boat was struck and its hold split open. Water struck the river sand hidden in the grain sacks. It poured out and crushed the bottom planks. Boatmen disguised from the black armor guards immediately sealed the dock and cut open the remaining grain sacks in public. 40,000 dan of moldy grain and 60,000 dan existing only in the accounts could no longer be concealed. Hanji abandoned the ship and fled that night. But every document left in the central warehouse bore Gu Jingming's acceptance seal. When news reached the capital, the emperor flew into a rage and ordered the Court of Judicial Review and the censorate to conduct a joint investigation. When Shen Mingju learned what happened, her first response was not concern over a grain shortage in the northwest. She stormed into the ducal residence and demanded to see me. She waited in the main hall for half an hour. The moment she saw me, she lunged forward. You have grain, do you not? You were the one who replaced it in our previous life. If you send 80,000 dan to the gorge now and have Xiao Heng speak for the Marquis before His Majesty, there is still time to save everything. I had the servants pull her away. I will send the grain, but not to repair Gu Jingming's accounts. It will be delivered by imperial order to relieve the army. Every dan will be registered under the Imperial Special Commissioner for Military Relief, and will have no connection to the Marquis of Yong'an's household. How can you be so heartless? If he is convicted, I will be implicated as well. That is why, before your wedding, I told you that what the Marquis's household lacked was not a red dowry procession, but a person capable of filling its holes. You knew Hanji committed corruption in our previous life, yet urged Gu Jingming to escort grain with him. Gu Jingming saw the sand aboard the boats and still sealed the documents. Now that the matter has been exposed, you want me to use 80,000 dan of real grain to make your false accounts true. Shen Mingju's face was bloodless, and her lips trembled, but you did it in our previous life. I did. He turned my achievement into an official position, then locked me inside a prayer hall and burned me to death. I looked at her. Elder sister, Gu Jingming was the person you seized. What gives you the right to seize my silver, my grain, and my life along with him? The question made her take a step back. Xiao Heng entered from outside, carrying a chill that had not yet dispersed. He had just returned from a palace discussion. Several dark spots of blood stained his cuff, though I could not tell whether they belonged to him or someone else. The 80,000 dan have already left the 3 civilian granaries and can reach the northwest within 5 days, he told me. Only then did he look at Shen Mingju. Madame Shen trespassed into the ducal residence and attempted to force the wife of an imperial kinsman to falsify the actual military grain total. There are witnesses outside the door to every word you just spoke. Continue causing trouble, and this duke can have the Court of Judicial Review question you as well. Shen Mingju no longer dared make a scene. Guiji supported her as she left. She had barely gone when an urgent dispatch arrived from Jiangnan. Chancellor Qing's men had discovered that we purchased grain in Linjiang, Songpu, and Huai'an, using seals from the Canal Transport Office. They detained every northbound grain ship on the charge that merchants were hoarding grain and disrupting market prices. A standard appeal would take at least 10 days, but the Northwestern Army could hold for only 7. Xiao Heng's right arm was still bleeding, yet he rose to see the emperor. I pressed him down and reread the urgent report. The seals detained grain ships, not warehouses and not ships carrying paper materials. Every spring, Inkstone Mountain Bookshop transported bamboo paper, lumber and alum from Jiangnan. To prevent dampness, its holds had always been built in 2 levels. The upper level carried light, bulky paper materials, while stones ballasted the lower level. If we replaced the ballast with sealed grain barrels, the vessels would still look like an ordinary paper fleet. Do not move all 3 granaries at once. I spread out the waterway map. Linjiang is closest to the Canal Transport Office and will certainly be watched. Leave it in place as obvious bait. Load the Songpu grain into spice ships and take the coastal route north. Transfer the Huai'an grain into paper boats and bypass the main lock through the tributary channels. We cannot transport all 80,000 dan at once. Send 30,000 first for the emergency. The rest will wait for an imperial order lifting the seals. Qin Zheng said transferring the cargo will take 2 days. The tributaries are shallow and large ships cannot pass. We do not need large ships. The river warehouses already have 400 small, flat-bottomed boats used to carry paper. Each can hold only a few dozen dan and has a shallow draft. They will travel separately by day and gather at the northern pass at night. Chancellor Qin can seal 3 official ships. He cannot seal 400 boats the common people use to earn their living. Xiao Heng looked at the route on the map. If they are discovered, the boat owners will be implicated. Then we will not deceive them. Anyone willing to make the journey will receive triple freight rates and a formal guarantee from the princely household. Anyone unwilling will carry paper as usual and receive every coin owed. Black armor guards will disperse among the boats. If inspected, they will first show Grand Princess Changning's military relief token. They are not to clash with local soldiers except as a last resort. Uncle Joe sent the message through banking ciphers that very night. Of the 400 boats, 317 agreed to carry grain. Many owners refused triple freight rates and said only that someone from their own families also served in the Northwest, and that they could not let their children defend a city on empty stomachs. I still deposited every coin promised under the names of their families. At dawn on the 3rd day, the first 30,000 dan gathered at the northern pass. By the time Chancellor Qin's men discovered them, the small boats had already passed 3 subsidiary locks. Local troops did not dare fire upon the token of Grand Princess Chang'ing and could only watch the fleet sail north. 5 days later, the grain entered the Northwestern Army camp on schedule. The commander sent back an old military banner covered in the soldiers' names by fast horse. It contained no praise or glorification, only 8 characters on the back, grain secured in the granary. All is well at the frontier. When I handed the banner to Xiao Heng, he looked at it for a long time. In the end, he had it hung in the study rather than stored in the treasury. Only after she left did I notice that Xiao Heng's right arm had remained hanging at his side. When I lifted his sleeve, the white cloth beneath was soaked through with blood. Did someone attack you in the palace? Prince Gong's men intercepted me. They wanted to seize the testimony delivered from the gorge. He spoke as casually as though a branch had scratched him on the road. The wound is not deep. I fetched the medicine box and cut away the cloth. The blade had slashed diagonally from his upper arm to his elbow. 1/2 inch deeper would have damaged muscle and bone. It was nothing like the not deep wound he described. You always say I must account for everything clearly. I lowered my head and applied medicine. Yet you value your own life so cheaply. Xiao Heng looked at me and suddenly asked, "You told Shen Mingju that Gu Jingming burned you to death?" My hand paused for an instant. Yes. So from the beginning you knew I died in the previous life, and you knew about the Western Mountain ambush. I knew only the result, not every part of what happened. Then did you save me and remove Du Cheng because of our cooperation, or because you could not bear to watch me die again? The medicinal powder fell upon the wound. He did not even furrow his brow, but I did not know how to answer. At first, naturally, it had been only cooperation. I needed his protection and a blade sharp enough to sever the ambitions of the Zhu and Shen families. But from the moment he executed the private property contract for me, from the moment he waited beneath the corridor with one reheated cup of tea after another, from the moment he entrusted his entire unguarded back to me, some accounts had ceased to be calculable. I rewrapped his wound. If your grace dies, who will repay the 3,000 taels in working capital? I lent the household. Xiao Heng laughed softly and did not force an answer from me. That night, the Court of Judicial Review returned to the capital with Gu Jingming and Han Ji's confidants in custody. Han Ji had been arrested at a posting station outside the city, carrying a travel authorization from Chancellor Qin's residence and a secret letter written by Prince Gong. In addition to the 12 false documents, Gu Jingming was discovered to have accepted 5,000 taels as a travel gift. Those 5,000 taels had come directly from Shen Mingju's sale of her estate. 3 days later, an imperial edict came down. Gu Jingming, Marquis of Yong'an, was stripped of his capital garrison post and imprisoned by the Court of Judicial Review pending trial. The accounts of every residence involved in the military grain case were sealed, and no property could be transferred. Late that same night, Qin Zheng brought worse news. Chancellor Qin had mobilized the 5-city garrison to surround the imperial city in the name of cleansing evil advisors from the emperor's side. Prince Gong's men were heading directly for the Duke of Dingguo's residence to seize Du Cheng's testimony and the old Xu family accounts. Before Xiao Heng donned armor and left, he entrusted the old seal of Prince and half of the black armor guards to me. "Can you hold the residence?" I accepted the heavy seal. "You guard the imperial city. I will guard your home." When Prince Gong's soldiers reached the long street, the banquet lanterns inside the ducal residence were still burning. I neither had the lamps extinguished nor barricaded the main gate. More than a dozen banquet tables remained set in the outer courtyard, though the people seated around them were not guests, but black armor guards dressed in ordinary clothes. Smoke continued rising from the kitchens, and servants came and went as usual. Seen from a distance, no one could guess that the most important objects in the residence had already been removed. Du Cheng's testimony was not in the study. The old Xu family accounts were not in the treasury. Half an hour earlier, I had divided them into 3 portions. One was sealed inside wax pills scented with spices and mixed among the sleep-soothing incense Clear Heart incense shop delivered to the palace. One was inserted into newly printed copies of collected annotations on the spring and autumn annals from Inkstone Mountain Bookshop, with 12 scholars carrying 1 volume each out through different ward gates. The final set was false and sat neatly locked in the concealed cabinet of the main courtyard. If Prince Gong's men did not enter, they would obtain nothing. If they did, they would leave conclusive evidence of rebellion before the private guards of an imperial kinsman's household. At midnight, fists pounded on the residence gate. The commanding officer was Luo Quan, deputy commander of the 5-city garrison. Standing outside, he shouted that, by order of Chancellor Qin, he had come to search for weapons privately stored by the Duke of Dingguo and evidence of collusion with merchants to disrupt grain prices. He ordered the residence opened immediately. Qin Zheng asked quietly, "Madam, shall we fire O's?" Number I tucked the old seal of Prince and into my sleeve. First ask him for the imperial decree and the Ministry of War countersign. The gatekeeper called the demand through the gate. Naturally, Luo Quan could produce neither. He showed only a written order from Chancellor Qin. After the two sides remained at an impasse for 15 minutes, he ordered his men to ram the gate. When the first log struck the Vermilion Gate, every banquet lantern inside the residence went dark at once. Luo Quan assumed we intended to move the evidence under cover of darkness, and immediately ordered his men over the walls. The first 20 or more had barely landed in the courtyard when trip ropes buried beneath the snow were pulled taut. Black armor guards emerged from behind the corridor pillars. Without killing anyone, they disarmed the intruders, bound their hands, and recorded every name and identification badge on the spot. Seeing the vanguard trapped, Luo Quan personally led soldiers to break through a side gate and charge toward the main courtyard. Qing Dai and I stood before the account office with only 8 guards behind us. When he saw me, joy flashed in his eyes. "Shen woman, surrender the ledgers proving Xiao Heng's rebellion, and this official can spare your life." "Do you mean this casket?" I raised a hand, and Qing Dai placed the false accounts on the stone table. "If you want it, come take it yourself." Fearing a trap, Luo Quan sent 2 personal guards forward. They opened the casket and found Du Cheng's testimony and several volumes of old Su accounts. He hurriedly turned 2 pages and recognized the names of Chancellor Qin, Han Ji, and Prince Gong's household. Abandoning all caution, he ordered his men to take everything. "The wife of the Duke of Dingguo has hidden fabricated evidence and slandered an imperial kinsman. Arrest her immediately." The instant he finished speaking, torches flared upon every surrounding roof. A court lady serving Grand Princess Changning walked from the main hall, holding high a princess's token issued by the palace. His Majesty gave a verbal command long ago. Evidence from the military grain case investigated by the Duke of Dingguo's household is under imperial protection. Luo Quan has neither imperial decree nor countersign. He led troops into the residence of an imperial kinsman without authorization and seized evidence. Both witnesses and physical proof are present. Only then did Luo Quan understand that whether the contents of the casket were true or false no longer mattered. The moment he led soldiers inside, the crime of rebellion was established. He turned to flee. Qin Zheng cut through the shaft of his spear with one stroke. Black armor guards closed in from the front and rear courtyards. In less time than it took 1 incense stick to burn, every weapon had been surrendered. But Luo Quan was not the final move. Amid the chaos, Qing Dai suddenly discovered a fire in the inner residence. It began in the western storehouse where paper and ink were kept, then raced up the eaves under the northern wind. The true accounts were not there, but the storehouse adjoined the old madam's longevity hall. The arsonist was the silk shop manager whom I had earlier retained for observation. While all the guards were in the outer courtyard, he stuffed oil-soaked cotton into the storehouse. I did not try to save the accounts. First, I had the wooden corridor connecting the western storehouse to Longevity Hall dismantled. Then the water teams organized in advance brought buckets to suppress the flames. After the household treasuries were reorganized, every courtyard had been equipped with sand vats, long hooks, and separate keys for each section. At last, those precautions proved their worth. The fire collapsed half the western storehouse. But it did not cross the dismantled corridor. When the old madam was escorted out, she looked at the flames towering skyward and took my hand. "You saved people before accounts. You did the right thing. Accounts can be reconstructed after they burn. Once a person is gone, nothing can restore them." As I said those words, I suddenly remembered the lock fastened from outside the prayer hall in my previous life. No one had dismantled the corridor then, and no one had carried water. Everyone was in the front courtyard celebrating Gu Jingming's promotion. My life had mattered less than a blank ledger. This life was different. After the fire was contained, news arrived from the palace. Taking advantage of the emperor's grave illness, Chancellor Qin forged a handwritten edict ordering the 5-city garrison to surround the imperial city, while Prince Gong led 300 personal guards through Donghua Gate. Xiao Heng had long since concealed the black armor guards inside the palace. A great general from the northwest also entered the capital with the genuine tiger tally to defend the throne. Prince Gong's troops had barely crossed Golden Water Bridge when they were attacked from both sides. Chancellor Qin was arrested in the cabinet duty room on the spot. At dawn, Xiao Heng rode back to the residence. He did not wear the grey-green robe he used to feign illness, but black light armor. Unmelted snow lay upon his shoulders, and the long saber at his waist was stained with blood. Civilians watched from a distance beyond the government troops. An old man recognized the former prince and banner hanging beside his saddle and knelt in the street. I stood before the blackened gate and watched him approach step by step through the morning mist. The sickly duke whom the world believed could not survive 3 years had finally cast off every invalid bone. There was no violent cough and no unsteady step. Before everyone, he swung down from his horse and walked toward me. The first thing he looked at was neither the burned courtyard nor Lo Quan bound below the steps. "Were you injured?" he asked. "Number." I looked at the blood splashed across his chest. "Where you?" "Number. You said the same thing last time." Xiao Heng paused, then honestly amended his answer. "An arrow grazed my left shoulder. Qin Zheng has already examined it." The black armor guards behind him lowered their heads one after another, pretending not to hear their master just returned from fighting in the imperial city reporting his injury to his wife. I had someone take his cloak. "Come inside and have it treated." He did not move. "Zhu Wei, once the imperial matters are resolved, I have a question to ask you. Can you not ask it now? I am covered in blood. It is inauspicious." It was the first time Xiao Heng had cared whether something was auspicious. 20 days later, the military grain case and palace coup case were concluded together. Hanji confessed that Chancellor Qin had embezzled military funds through Hengtong Grain House. Gu Jingming's 12 acceptance documents and the accounts recording his travel gift were all presented to the emperor. Chancellor Qin was sentenced to beheading. Prince Gong was stripped of his title and confined, and their accomplices were punished according to their crimes. Although Gu Jingming had not participated in the coup, he had knowingly approved false grain. He was stripped of the Marquis of Yong'an title. His illicit games were confiscated, and he was exiled to Lingnan for 5 years. Despite his illness, the emperor summoned imperial clansmen and senior ministers to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. I was also called to the palace that day by imperial command. Under ritual law, a woman of the inner household had no place speaking in a major military and state case. But half the evidence submitted by the Court of Judicial Review came from old Sioux family accounts, and my businesses purchased the military relief grain. The emperor specially permitted me to answer questions from behind a pearl curtain. Kneeling in the hall, Chancellor Qin still tried to blame the merchants. He claimed the old Shu family accounts came from an uncertain source, that Inkstone Mountain Bookshop had hoarded grain during a military shortage to raise prices, and that Xiao Heng and I conspired as husband and wife to purchase the loyalty of the Northwestern Army with 80,000 dan of grain. I had palace attendants place 24 grain contracts, contemporaneous rice prices from 3 regions, and every freight payment before the imperial desk. This common woman purchased old grain held by merchants and surplus grain from estates. The average price was 3 cash above the monthly market price, reflecting ordinary storage losses, and not enough to move the market. Grain prices in the 3 regions fluctuated by only 2 cash during the purchasing period. After the military grain case erupted, they rose by 11 cash because Hengtong Grain House bought frantically. As for freight and labor, every cost was paid from this common woman's private property, with signatures from the boat owners in the accounts. The princely household did not take a single tael from the Ministry of Revenue. I then presented the old military banner. After the grain entered the northwestern camp, it was jointly inspected by the army supervisor, commanding general, and the Ministry of Revenue administrator attached to the army. Not a single dan entered Prince Anne's private storehouse. If this is called purchasing military loyalty, this common woman is willing to donate the cost and interest of all 80,000 dhan to the army. I ask only that the court first inquire whose private treasury the official grain adulterated with sand was purchasing. For a time, no one spoke in the hall. The Minister of Revenue verified the rice prices and bank transfers on the spot and confirmed the figures. In that way, page after page of true accounts crushed Chancellor Qin's retaliatory accusation of grain hoarding. Gu Jingming was also brought into the hall. The moment he saw me behind the pearl curtain, he cried urgently, "Your Majesty, this subject was deceived by Han Ji. The Shen woman is familiar with grain affairs. In our previous life, in the past, she identified false warehouse receipts for this subject. This time, she knew there was a problem with the grain and deliberately refused to warn me. She intentionally entrapped an official of the court." The Chief Justice asked, "Gu Jingming, before the military grain departed, did the inspector at the gorge report sand beneath the ship's hold to you?" He did not answer. "Did you personally inspect the third vessel and discover that the sack weights did not match the grain total?" He still did not answer. "Were the 5,000 taels of travel money from Hanji found in your private chest?" After 3 questions, his claim of deception could no longer stand. I looked at him through the pearl curtain and said calmly, "Since Lord Gu says I identified false documents for you in the past, you should have understood the danger more clearly. You did not ask me, and you did not conduct your own verification, because you believed that no matter how great the disaster you caused, someone would always rescue you. The court appointed you, not your former wife Silver or her mind. I have no duty to conceal the crime of a man who knowingly broke the law." After listening, the Emperor closed his eyes in exhaustion. Such a man is unfit to manage grain in any life. Gu Jingming jerked his head up, uncertain whether the Emperor was merely rebuking the nonsense he had spoken or had grasped another meaning. He tried to speak again, but imperial guards gagged him and dragged him away. Xiao Heng then presented the late Emperor's secret edict, Du Cheng's testimony, and the original fabricated evidence from the old prince and case. Grand Princess Chang'ing testified before the court that Prince An's supposed unauthorized troop movement had actually been made under imperial command to rescue the throne. Chancellor Qin's father-in-law altered the Ministry of War's original archive, causing Prince An's line to suffer injustice for 20 years. Restoring the princely rank was not merely a reward for Xiao Heng's service in suppressing the rebellion. It was the belated justice the court owed Prince An's line. The old prince and case was formally overturned, and Xiao Heng's rank as a prince was restored because the crown prince was young and the emperor's health was failing. Xiao Heng was further commanded to oversee the 6 ministries and assist the Eastern Palace. He received a gold register and seal and was styled Prince Regent. When the eunuch bearing the decree reached the ducal residence, the scorch marks above its gate had not yet been cleaned. I knelt beside Xiao Heng and heard the decree's final sentence. Madame Shen, wife of the Duke of Dingguo, remained calm in a crisis, protected evidence and mobilized grain to relieve the army. She is hereby invested as Princess Consort to the Prince Regent. The gold register was placed solemnly in my hands. It was much heavier and brighter than the gold betrothal card of half a year earlier. By staging a fall into the water, Shen Mingju exchanged her marriage for the position of Madame Marquis she desired so fiercely, believing she had pushed me toward a dying man. In the end, bailiffs sealed the vermilion gates of the Marquis's residence, while I rose from illegitimate daughter to princess consort to the Prince Regent. After the ceremonial procession dispersed, Xiao Heng took me to the western courtyard being repaired. The newly planted plum trees had only just formed buds. From his sleeve, he removed a neatly folded sheet of paper. Before going to the western courtyard, he first led me into the concealed chamber of the outer study. A map of the northern frontier from 20 years earlier hung on the wall. In addition to the late emperor's secret edict, the cabinets held dozens of registers of trade routes. At the bottom of the final volume, I saw my mother's name, Su Wantang. "You knew my mother long ago?" I asked. "I would not say I knew her." Xiao Heng took out an old letter. "In the year the Northern Army's pay was cut off, Su family caravans transported medicine to Prince An's army twice. Your mother did not charge an inflated price. She asked only for a written order allowing Su women to hold property independently. After Prince Anne's household was convicted, the order became worthless paper. The letter was written in Mother's familiar, elegant, small script. It contained no grand declarations. She merely listed each medicine, the losses during transport, and unpaid porterage. Then added a line at the end: soldiers have families waiting for them. Medicine cannot wait until the court finishes deciding who wins. So you sought a marriage with the Shen family because of the old Su accounts? That was one reason. Xiao Heng did not embellish. Chancellor Qin transferred military funds through grain houses, and I knew the old Su trade routes might have preserved evidence. The Shen family also had the identity of a general's household, which could block Prince Gong from installing his woman as a secondary consort in my residence. The original gold card named only a Shen daughter because, no matter who married me, I intended to give her the position of lawful wife without allowing her access to secret matters. What if Shen Mingju had still been the bride? After a moment of silence, he said, I would have created another set of outer accounts showing her the prosperity she wanted to see. Du Cheng would have had no opportunity to approach the inner residence, and she would not have learned the western mountain route. Plainly, in our previous life, he had not had time to do that. Shen Mingju fought for authority over the household. To appease the new bride, the old madam assigned both Du Cheng and Chunxing to serve beside her. Information from the inner and outer residence became mixed, ultimately creating a deadly trap. When did you change your mind and decide to let me see the true accounts? Before the bridal sedan entered the gate. I raised a brow, based only upon my dowry list. You rejected 128 cases of respectability and took only 2 old Su family shops and 7 boxes of books. I knew then that you could at least distinguish what was truly useful. When you produced the South City Estates shipping slip on our wedding night, I decided to wager on you once. And if you had lost, I had already wagered my life by feigning illness for so many years. Trusting one additional person could hardly make matters worse. Xiao Heng spoke lightly, but I saw an old medicine bottle inside the cabinet. It bore the mark of a Western Mountain posting station. It was the false medicine he had planned to carry during the earlier ambush. Everyone believed he had full confidence. In truth, he too had prepared to die without a body should any step go wrong. I resealed Mother's old letter. In the future, before you wager your life, show me the accounts. If I judge the loss unacceptable, you may not stake it. Does my princess intend to keep accounts over this prince's life as well? Your life is now tied to the reputation of the princely household, the women's school, and 80,000 dan of grain. It ceased being your private property long ago. He looked at me for a long time and said softly, Very well, I will show you everything from now on. Only after we left the concealed chamber did he take out the document containing our divorce condition. It was the condition we had agreed upon on our wedding night. Are you withdrawing your promise? I asked. Number before my eyes, he put the paper into the brazier. Flames quickly curled across the writing. At the beginning, I promised that once my great task succeeded, if you wanted to leave, I would give you a divorce instrument. The task is complete now, so I have come to ask you. The paper ash collapsed gently inside the brazier. Shen Jue, do you still want to leave? I did not answer at once. Xiao Heng did not press me. He simply waited beneath the plum tree. A trace of almost imperceptible anxiety lay in the eyes capable of silencing every court official. The ducal household still owes me 3,000 taels in working capital, I said. The princely household will repay it tomorrow. Inkstone Mountain Bookshop delivered 3 secret letters for you and ruined 2 horses. I will compensate you with 10. I blocked a crossbow bolt for you, guarded the residence gate, and lost half the western storehouse to fire. How do we reckon those? At last, Xiao Heng understood, and a smile slowly appeared in his eyes. I cannot repay those, he said. I can only offer the rest of my life as security. I reached up and brushed a plum blossom from his shoulder, then repay them slowly. It rained in the capital on the day the plaque was removed from the Marquis of Yong'an's residence. From prison at the Court of Judicial Review, Gu Jingming wrote a divorce letter and had someone deliver it to Shen Mingju. In the letter, he placed every fault upon her. He said that if she had not confused him with stories of their previous life, and if she had not sworn that the military grain assignment would certainly bring promotion, he would never have trusted Hanji or affixed his seal to the acceptance documents. Holding the divorce letter, Shen Mingju rushed to the prison gate and argued with him through the bars. You were the one who took Hanji's silver. You saw the sand in the grain and signed anyway. What gives you the right to blame me? If you had not said Shen Jue merely enjoyed good fortune through marriage, why would I have underestimated her? If you had not fought to fall into the water, she should have been the one to marry into the Marquis's household. Do you think that if she had married you, she would still have worked herself to death for you as she did in our previous life? She already hated you completely. At least she understands and can inspect grain. Unlike you, she possesses more than 128 cases of empty display. The argument spread throughout the Court of Judicial Review. Two people who had lived a second life and believed they understood the will of heaven finally tore away every shred of dignity, each fighting to prove that the other had caused their ruin. The divorce letter ultimately took effect. Imperially bestowed heirlooms and everyday objects from Shen Mingju's dowry were returned to her. The estates and shops used as collateral in the military grain case were sealed according to law. The cash she brought into the Marquis's household had long since been spent. She used the Eastern Pearl jewelry set and several other valuable pieces to bribe prison guards for Gu Jingming. In the end, she took away only a dozen or so trunks. They looked numerous but contained mostly screens, ritual vessels, and outdated cloth that could not be exchanged for food. Madame Qin sent a carriage to collect her, but Shen Mingju stood before the gate of the Marquis's residence and refused to board. In her previous life, the ducal household had sent her back to her maiden family, and she endured endless gossip from the clan. In this life, she had exhausted every scheme to exchange her marriage. To return in disgrace again would be to admit that she had been wrong in 2 lifetimes. She sold 2 trunks of household objects and rented a small courtyard in Willow Lane outside the capital, keeping only Guiji to attend to her daily needs. At first, she still believed Gu Jingming would return from Lingnan after 5 years, and that the remainder of her dowry could allow her to rise again. She took over the 3 unprofitable shops that had accompanied her into the Marquis's household. Following her memories of what I had done in our previous life, she cut managers, forced down purchase prices, and tried to sell the goods elsewhere. But she remembered only that I had once reorganized the shops. She did not know which route suited which merchandise, nor that managers squeezed too hard on prices would substitute inferior goods. In less than 6 months, customers reported the silk shop to the authorities for selling cloth with unstable dye, while the medicinal shop purchased a damp shipment of astragalus. Compensation, unpaid rent, and workers' wages descended together, and 2 of the 3 shops soon closed. Guiji urged her to seek Madame Qin, but she refused. Guiji suggested selling the coral screen, and she could not bear to part with it. It was the final proof of her identity as the eldest legitimate daughter. Only when winter arrived and she could no longer afford charcoal did she have the screen sent to a brokerage. After inspection, the broker offered only 800 taels because a crack in the middle of the coral had long ago been repaired. The value of 5,000 taels recorded in the books was only an invented figure the general's residence had written years earlier to make the dowry look impressive. Sitting in the empty room and looking at a banknote for 800 taels, she understood for the first time what I meant by the difference between value in the accounts and money in one's hand. After becoming princess consort to the prince regent, I did not swallow every business of the ducal household into my own name. When Xiao Heng's princely rank was restored, more than a dozen estates and shops suddenly arrived as gifts from members of the imperial clan. Some advised me to take the opportunity to expand. Even the old madam said the princely household now stood differently from before, and that there was no need to calculate money so carefully. I nevertheless divided all businesses among 3 sets of accounts: the princely household's common property-funded household expenses and clan support. Imperial grants were separately recorded under ritual law. My 2 shops and the businesses I later established remained private property. Part of the profit from Inkstone Mountain Bookshop funded a women's school. I did not do it to purchase fame. While auditing accounts, I discovered that many managers' wives and daughters spent their entire lives recording household transactions without being able to write their own names on a contract. The women's school first taught literacy and arithmetic, then contracts, medicine, weaving, dyeing, and other skills with which a woman could support herself. Clear Heart Incense Shop employed graduates as accountants, paying them a fixed monthly wage so they did not need to depend upon relatives. Some people said I carried the air of a merchant and did not resemble a princess consort. When Xiao Heng heard the remark at an imperial clan banquet, he asked the speaker on the spot. Merchants transported the 80,000 dan of grain that relieved the princely army last year, and merchants wove the winter clothes worn by soldiers in the northwest. Since you despise merchants, do not collect your imperial clan stipend from the commercial taxes of the Ministry of Revenue this year. That person never dared speak again. In the blink of an eye, the Lantern Festival of the following year arrived. For once, Xiao Heng had a night when he did not need to receive ministers. He changed into an ordinary dark teal robe and accompanied me outside to see the lanterns. He refused the full ceremonial procession of the Prince Regent, and had only Qin Zheng and several guards follow at a distance. We walked from Vermilion Bird Street to Anding Bridge. Lantern stalls joined into a sea of fire along the road, while stands selling flower lanterns, sugar paintings, and flatbread packed the streets so tightly that water could not pass. Under the bridge, I saw a familiar figure. Shen Mingju wore a washed-out cotton coat and bargained with the vendor at a flatbread stall. Only 3 copper coins remained in her hand. She wanted a hot cake but could not bear to add 1 coin for the meat filling. Guiji had returned to the general's residence 2 months earlier. Shen Mingju now carried her bamboo basket alone without even a silver hairpin in her hair. She saw me as well. The crowd streamed between us. She first saw the fox fur cloak I wore, then saw Xiao Heng steady the lantern knocked askew by a passerby. The pride she had forced herself to maintain for a year finally shattered. Shen Jue, she pushed through the crowd, her voice hoarse. You knew all along, did you not? You knew Xiao Heng would not die. You knew Gu Jingming was nothing without you. That was why you deliberately gave me the Marquis's household. I knew where Gu Jingming's official career came from, and I knew Xiao Heng did not die of illness in our previous life. I admitted, but you chose to fall into the water. You fought for the dowry. You urged Gu Jingming to accept the military grain assignment. I did not force you to take a single step. If you had told me sooner in our previous life, I told you someone in the ducal household was secretly dealing with the Qin family. I told you to investigate Du Cheng and Chengxing. You said I was jealous of your grand marriage and immediately repeated my words to Du Cheng. After the Western Mountain ambush, you said Xiao Heng had always been fated to die young, and that his death had nothing to do with you. She froze where she stood. I did not reconstruct the whole truth until Chengxing was questioned in this life. In our previous life, I noticed dealings between Du Cheng and Hengtong Grain House on a spy shipping list and warned Shen Mingju out of goodwill. She did not believe me and instead told Du Cheng as a joke. That caused him to destroy the evidence early and accelerate the arrangements for the Western Mountain ambush. Elder sister, I did not steal your prosperity. I looked at her. You mistook the umbrella others held above you for your own sky and treated every warning as jealousy. Given a second life, you still wanted only the results. You refused to learn the skills or bear the consequences. Her lips moved, and tears finally fell. Can I still return to the Shen family? Father never forbade you to return. Mother sent people to collect you 3 times. I am not the one stopping you. Your pride is. She lowered her head to the 3 copper coins in her hand and stood there for a long time. I did not take her back to the princely residence, nor did I humiliate her with banknotes. Before leaving, I had Qingdai give her the women's school notice recruiting apprentice accountants. If you are willing to learn counting rods from the beginning, the wage is 3 taels a month. If not, pretend you never saw it. Shen Mingju gripped the paper, her gaze complicated. Are you not afraid I will compete with you again once I learn? Many people understand accounts, and many people know how to live well. My position does not depend upon your ignorance. Xiao Heng took my hand and led me onto Anding Bridge. The voices beneath it were loud, but no footsteps followed us from behind. The next day, the administrator of the women's school delivered the register of new students. The characters on the final line were crooked, but the three characters Shen Mingju could still be recognized. She clashed with the administrator on her first day. The women's school assigned seats not by birth, but by literacy and arithmetic. Shen Mingju had studied under a female tutor since childhood and was proficient in poetry and etiquette. She believed she belonged in the highest class. The administrator produced a shipping order and asked her to calculate the selling price needed for a 10% profit on 200 bolts of cloth transported from Songjiang to the capital. After deducting freight, loss, and brokerage fees, she calculated for half an hour. The price she wrote would not even recover the principal. The administrator assigned her to the elementary accounting class, where she learned the abacus, contracts, and ordinary merchandise beside merchants' daughters in their teens. Shen Mingju's face darkened. She invoked her former identity as Madame Yong'an and demanded a private teacher. The administrator gave one reply. There is no Madame Marquis here, and no elder sister of the princess consort. If you can pay tuition and obey the rules, you are a student. If you want servants, leave and seek a more capable establishment. Shen Mingju turned away in anger. Outside the gate, she saw two silk shop workers carrying a basket of returned goods past the street corner. That shop had once been part of her dowry. Because she sold fading cloth, people still pointed at its signboard. She stood at the gate for a long time. At last, she went back inside and wrote her name again. During the first 3 months, she threw the abacus almost every day. She was accustomed to having someone clean up every disaster around her. Whenever the figures failed to balance, her first response was that the account was wrong, the teacher was biased, or a classmate had deliberately misled her. The administrator never argued. She simply returned the erroneous work and had Shen Mingju recalculate it the following day. Once, Shen Mingju understated the porterage on a shipment of cotton by 17 taels. In a real business, the error would have erased half the profit from the entire order. She insisted that the boat owner should not charge so much and spent a whole day at the docks questioning people. Only then did she learn that rain had forced the shipment to change oiled coverings once and required 6 additional porters. When she returned, she did not throw the account. She silently added the 17 taels to the cost. It was perhaps the first time in 2 lives she admitted that a bad result did not necessarily mean someone had stolen her good fortune. She might simply have failed to account for some money. Father later came personally to the princely residence to thank me. He brought an old wooden casket. It contained several pieces of jewelry from my birth mother that Madame Qin had placed in the common household store, and a stack of handwritten notes. They were not worth much silver, but they were relics I had requested many times in my youth, and which no one had ever agreed to return. After your mother died, I always said military affairs kept me busy and left the inner household entirely to Madame Qin. Father sat in the outer hall with much more white at his temples than the last time I saw him. Mingju was the eldest legitimate daughter. If she cried, someone comforted her. You did not cry, so I assumed you lacked nothing. Looking back now, it was not that you caused no worry, it was that I failed to take care. I accepted the wooden casket. I neither spoke of forgiveness nor reopened old accounts. If father truly feels remorse in the future, do not again demand that the illegitimate sons and daughters in the household purchase peace with good behavior. Give each person what is due under the rules. When one person makes a mistake, do not make another bear it. Father nodded. Before leaving, he offered me an estate outside the city as compensation. I still refused. What I wanted had never been to become a princess consort and make everyone who had ignored me compete to offer property and apology. I only wanted them to admit that an illegitimate daughter was not a replaceable name on a marriage agreement, and that a quiet person also possessed pain and choices of her own. Madame Qin did not come. At first, she resented my refusal to save the Marquis's household. Later, when Shen Mingju entered the women's school, she thought it shameful that her daughter worked in accounts. Only when Shen Mingju opened her fabric shop did Madame Qin quietly send a matron to purchase its first bolt of cloth. She buried the fabric at the bottom of a trunk and never praised it openly. Some people never learn to admit their mistakes honestly in an entire lifetime. Fortunately, I no longer needed to wait for her words before moving forward. Shen Mingju did not wash away the past with one notice, nor did we become loving sisters from then on. At first, she still complained that 3 taels a month was too little, and still threw her abacus when someone called her the abandoned wife of a deposed Marquis. But after throwing it, she picked it up herself and finished the day's accounts. 3 years later, she left the women's school and opened a small fabric shop outside the capital. She no longer wore Eastern pearls or rode in a magnificent carriage, but she finally knew the purchase price, porterage and profit of every bolt. She never remarried and never again asked me to exchange our lives. As for Gu Jingming, while serving his sentence in Lingnan, he continued blaming others for his failure. After completing his 5-year sentence, he wrote once asking to see me and saying he was willing to repay the life he owed me from our previous existence. Xiao Heng kept the letter beneath his desk for 3 days before it accidentally reached my hands. After reading it, I sent a 4-word reply. There is no need to meet again. Once the messenger left, Xiao Heng opened a memorial as though nothing had happened. I asked, Your Highness withheld the letter for 3 days. The courier station delivered it incorrectly. It reached your desk. That still counts as an incorrect delivery. Without changing expression, he said, The princely residence is large. Such things are inevitable. I laughed aloud. He put down the memorial and took my hand. The thin calluses formed by years of holding a saber remained in his palm. Jue, he said, the gold register ceremony is set for the 6th day of next month. There is one more matter I wish to discuss with you. What matter? Marry me again. Xiao Heng wanted to hold another bride receiving ceremony. After his rank as prince was restored, the Ministry of Rites prepared the investiture of the princess consort according to protocol. The gold register, precious seal, and court robes were all provided. There was no need for another wedding. But Xiao Heng added a handwritten note to the ministry's ceremonial schedule, requesting that on the day of my investiture, he personally leave the princely residence, go to the general's residence, and receive me as his bride once more. Holding the annotated page, the Minister of Rites lost 2 nights of sleep to worry. His Highness and the princess consort are already married. There is no ritual precedent for a second bride receiving ceremony. Xiao Heng answered calmly. When this prince first married, I carried a secret imperial edict and could not show my true condition. I sat at the wedding banquet for only 15 minutes. Now that the old case has been overturned, I will make up the ceremony I owe her. The ritual code's silence does not mean we cannot add it. The Minister of Rites did not dare argue and came to ask my opinion instead. Originally, I thought it unnecessary. Though our first wedding had involved calculations, I had not been mistreated. Xiao Heng personally received the bride, and the ducal household afforded me every dignity. I had never regarded one wedding ceremony as more important than the life that followed. But while organizing old belongings that night, I saw the original gold card again. Its corners were slightly worn. It said only seeks the hand of a Shen daughter without my name. At the time, Xiao Heng had needed only a wife who could block an imperial marriage decree, while the Shen family needed only a daughter to replace the eldest. We each took what we needed within someone else's game. Even my red wedding procession had seemed like a temporary exchange. The woman he intended to receive now was not an eligible daughter of the Shen family, nor an ally capable of guarding his accounts and gates. It was Shen Jue. I had Qingdai reply to the Ministry of Rites, arrange it according to His Highness's wishes. When the news spread, the entire capital erupted. Some said the Prince Regent indulged his wife beyond reason. Some said I used a merchant's methods to entrap a prince. A censor even submitted a memorial urging Xiao Heng to prioritize affairs of state and avoid extravagance. Xiao Heng retained the memorial without reply and published only the wedding expenditures. Not one coin would come from the state treasury. No common laborers would be conscripted, and no long streets would be sealed. Every cost would be paid from his princely stipend and private treasury. Even the lantern frames along the streets would be built at market rates by artisans recruited through Inkstone Mountain Bookshop. The censor had nothing more to say. Father had the general's residence repainted half a month in advance. Madame Chin reopened the account book from when the dowries had been divided and wanted to add 64 cases from the common household funds. I politely refused. I received what was due at my first marriage. This time, the Shen family is not compensating me, and the princely household is not displaying wealth to outsiders. I will prepare my own red dowry procession. When the managers of Inkstone Mountain Bookshop, Clear Heart Incense Shop, the Women's School, and the former ducal estates and shops heard the news, however, they independently sent wedding gifts. They were not coral screens or antiques useful only for display in a warehouse. The bookshop sent a newly carved set of printing blocks for 10,000 volumes. The incense shop sent contracts for 3 years of imported spices. The women of the school jointly made a long scroll of 100 professions, embroidered with bookshops, farming estates, docks, dye houses, and apothecaries. Every object could grow, and everyone remembered a road I had walked with my own feet. I arranged them into 64 carrying cases. The number was far smaller than Shen Mingju's 128, but not a single case was an empty shell. On the night before the grand ceremony, Shen Mingju came from her fabric shop outside the capital. She wore plain teal clothes and carried 2 lengths of patterned satin she had made herself. I did not come to beg you. She put down the satin, her tone still somewhat stiff. Nor did I come to apologize. The administrator of the women's school said graduates may give something they made themselves when someone celebrates a happy occasion. This is all I have worth presenting now. I unfolded the fabric. 1 length was woven with begonias, and the other with twin lotus blossoms on one stem. There was not a single loose thread at the edges. It is beautiful, I said. She looked at the phoenix coronet on the table, and suddenly said, after Xiao Heng died in our previous life, I blamed him, the ducal household, and you. Only after doing business myself these past few years did I understand that even one missing shipping slip can create a disaster for a shop. I kept Chunxing beside me, allowed Zhu Cheng to enter and leave the inner residence at will, and treated your warning as a joke. That ambush, I was not entirely blameless. It was the first time she admitted it. Xiao Heng did not pursue you because Du Cheng was the principal culprit. It will be enough if you live your own life well from now on, she nodded. At the doorway, she turned back. Shen Juwei, this time it is your own choice. Is it not? It is. Then that is good. At dawn on the 6th day, fresh snow covered Vermilion Bird Street. Xiao Heng wore a prince's wedding robes and rode Jai to the general's residence. Unlike the first bridal procession, he had not painted sickness onto his lips or deliberately coughed. A black princely crown gathered his long hair, and golden coiling dragons covered the vermilion ceremonial robe. As he rode from the end of the street, the people opened a path of their own accord. Many recognized him and began to kneel. But he had the ritual officer announce that this was a family ceremony and he would accept no prostrations from the people. When father placed my hand in his eyes were faintly red. When Jue was a child, I always thought her quiet nature meant she did not fight for anything, so I watched over her less. Only later did I learn that not fighting did not mean she needed nothing. In the future, your highness, father-in-law may rest assured. Xiao Heng bowed solemnly. She will not need to fight. Everything this prince owns is shared with her. Of everything that belongs to her, this prince will not take the smallest part. Those words understood me better than any oath sworn to mountains and seas. The bridal sedan did not circle the city in a display of wealth. It travelled only along the 3 main streets required by ritual. The roadsides were filled with lanterns. The people had brought spontaneously. They did not bear the same tired wishes for wealth, rank, or many sons, but the names written by women from the school. Those women, once permitted to keep accounts for their fathers and brothers but forbidden to sign them, had hung their own names openly along the long street for the first time. Looking through the gap in the sedan curtain, I suddenly felt that this second wedding did not belong to me alone. It also belonged to the Shen Jue who had been locked in a prayer hall in our previous life, beating on the door until death without anyone hearing. The main gate of the princely residence stood wide open. The old madam waited upon the steps in her formal titled robes. Grand Princess Changning personally presided over the nuptial wine ceremony. We did not bow again to heaven, earth, or the ancestors. Instead, we stood side by side before Prince's old banner, and the late emperor's decree overturning the case, and performed one ceremonial bow. After the ceremony, Xiao Heng did not immediately go to the front courtyard to entertain the guests. He took me to the newly built capital viewing terrace of the princely residence. The snow-covered roofs of the capital stretched into the distance, while the golden tiles of the imperial city shone far away. The lanterns of Vermilion Bird Street reached from below our feet to the horizon like a flowing river of stars. He removed a new gold card from his sleeve. I laughed. The marriage is already complete. Why give me another card? The first said only that I sought a Shen daughter. I have always found that improper. I opened it. Only 2 lines appeared on the gold-flecked paper written in his own hand. In this life, Xiaoheng seeks only Shen Juwei as his wife. May we return together year after year and never betray each other. There was no ducal title, no honorific of Prince Regent, and no old agreement between the Shen and Xiao families. It held only his name and mine. On our wedding night, you said you sought no love, only cooperation. Xiaoheng stood beside me. Letter, you protected the princely residence, saved me, and saved the soldiers of the Northwest. I can repay the silver I owe you, and I can repay the life I owe you. Only affection cannot be calculated. Juwei, I will take no secondary consort and keep no concubine. In this life, I will stand beside you alone, not because of a contract and not to repay a debt. I love you. The wind lifted the corner of the card. I folded it again and tucked it against my chest. Your Highness should remember today's words. If you ever regret them, I will take the shops, the account office, the women's school, and every manager in the princely household who makes the most money. Only those. I will take you as well. Xiaoheng froze for an instant, then laughed. He lowered his head and kissed me very gently, as though cherishing something once lost and finally recovered. The emperor survived another 3 years. On the day the crown prince assumed personal rule at 15, Xiaoheng returned the regent's gold seal before the entire court. Unlike Chancellor Qin and Prince Gong, he did not clutch power in his hands. In gratitude, the new emperor continued to honor him as prince and permitted him to participate in military and governmental affairs without attending court every day. The first thing he did with his newfound leisure was visit Inkstone Mountain bookshop and inspect the true general ledger I had concealed for years. After reading it, the prince, who once oversaw all 6 ministries, remained silent for a long time. My wife, Clear Heart Incense Shop, earns more net profit in 1 year than this prince receives in 3 years of stipends. That is why I told you on our wedding night that I did not want your money, only the protection of your status. Then has this prince been living off his wife all these years? If your Highness feels guilty, you can copy books for the shop to settle the account. The next day, no one knew who spread the story that the former Prince Regent was copying accounts in the bookshop's rear courtyard after retiring from the regency. Grand Princess Changning laughed for an entire day, while the old madam ordered the kitchen to prepare an extra tonic soup for him. Unable to identify who leaked the story, Xiaoheng ultimately entered the debt under my name and closed the bedroom door that night to collect it slowly. We also argued over whether the women's school should expand to other prefectures, whether the princely household should borrow money to repair a riverbank, whether he hid an injury from me, and whether I concealed a risk from him. Neither of us forever yielded to the other, but after every argument, the accounts still lay open upon the same table, and 2 people still walked the road side by side. In the 5th year of our marriage, the first group of female managers trained by the women's school took control of the river warehouses. In the 7th, the fleet of Clear Heart Incense shops sailed south across the sea for the first time. In the 10th, Inkstone Mountain bookshop delivered free primers to military families. In the Northwest, one spring several years later, the women's school held an arithmetic gathering in the old gardens of the general's residence. The weeping willows still grew beside Kushui Lake. The stone bridge, pavilions, and moss at the water's edge had barely changed. More than a dozen young women argued over freight rates in a pavilion with ledgers in their arms. Others measured the lake from small boats, their laughter startling a flock of waterbirds into the sky. I stood where I had fallen into the water and saw my reflection in the lake. There was no water-red cloak, no maid hiding behind a rockery, and no man waiting to use the favor of saving my life to decide whom I would marry. Xiaoheng draped a coat around my shoulders from behind and asked what I was looking at. A road I did not take. He followed my gaze to the lake. Do you regret it? Number, I only wonder sometimes whether if the woman I was then had never returned, she could only have died inside that prayer hall. Xiaoheng took my hand. She did not walk that road for nothing, because you remember what she suffered. You left an extra door open for the girls who came later. On the opposite bank, the administrator of the women's school returned an incorrectly written contract to a student. The young woman argued indignantly for 2 sentences. After lowering her head and seeing the error, she sat down to rewrite it. No one decided her life because of her humble birth, and no one took what she deserved because she was quiet. I suddenly understood that rebirth did not erase my previous life. That fire, that lock, and every achievement stolen from me ultimately became the boundaries I refused to surrender in this one. They no longer trapped me, but they taught me how to protect my own choices and those of the women who came later. People asked whether the greatest fortune of this life began with the gold card from the Duke of Dingguo's household. I thought for a moment and shook my head. What truly changed everything was not the gold card, the red dowry procession, or marrying a man who later held supreme power at court. It was the day of the Kushui Lake banquet, when I finally stopped walking toward the water. I put down the fate others had written for me, reclaimed the 2 broken shops my mother left behind, and reclaimed my own life. Gold cards can be exchanged. Marriages can be exchanged. Glory and wealth also change hands. Only the ability, escape route, and choices held in one's own hands cannot be taken by anyone. And Xiaoheng is the man with whom, on this road I chose myself, I am willing to walk hand in hand for a lifetime. Fellow rational thinkers, this game of preemptive risk avoidance and asset restructuring has now come full circle. Looking back at the entire system, the Heroine offers an exceptionally cool model of overwhelming strategic superiority. While everyone assumes rebirth is about choosing a different man to marry, her true operation is to change her position within the institution of marriage from the traditional wife's role in which the husband's family owns the dowry, the common household owns the income, and the husband receives the credit, to an equal partner with independent property, self-operated shops, and copies of every contract. She is trapped neither by the fall into the lake nor by her lawful mother's division of the dowries. She actively chooses 2 apparently ruined shops because she knows that book value does not equal cash in hand. On her wedding night, she produces a warehouse shipping slip and demands negotiations because she knows affection may betray, while a strategic alliance joined by mutual interests is stronger than an oath. Her treatment of her former life husband, Gu Jingming, is the most brilliant stroke. She does not take direct revenge. She removes every step he climbed in the previous life and watches him sign the false military grain documents with his own hand before leaping into the trap set by Han Ji and Chancellor Qin. She does not even stop him. She simply ceases to replace the missing 80,000 dan of grain for him. That is not cruelty. It is finally making a person bear the full consequences of his own choices. Even more important is the institution she builds afterward. The women's school is not an ornament for purchasing fame. It teaches arithmetic, contracts, and independent means of earning a living to women who spent their lives keeping accounts for fathers and brothers. Without even knowing how to write their own names, she divides the businesses among 3 account books, keeping the princely household's common property, imperial grants, and personal property entirely separate. She refuses to turn the power of the princess consort to the prince regent into another whirlpool that swallows other people's interests. From a victim who broke her hands against the barred door of a prayer hall, she becomes the player who personally dismantles the corridor, stops the fire, and snatches Xiaoheng's unguarded back away from Ducheng's ambush. Remember the central logic. True freedom does not mean avoiding every trap. It means that when the trap appears again, you have the ability to go around it or push the person who dug it inside. From the moment she feigns illness to avoid the water beside Kushui Lake, she wins through advanced intelligence and early allocation of resources. Xiaoheng's significance does not lie in his later becoming Prince Regent. It lies in his being the first person to acknowledge that everything belonging to her will always remain hers. That private property contract is more valuable than 128 cases of dowry. If you also appreciate this cool narrative style that turns the game around without relying on tears and uses only contracts and capital for an absolute reckoning, Hit all 3 buttons to register your approval of the system. I am Maggie Liu. Keep a clear strategic mind. I will see you in the next battleground.